Chapter 83. Gustav checked the percentage of the combination procedure almost every hour in school. It was still moving as slow as ever. Even after the entire day had passed, the procedure was not still completed. While he was training with Miss Amy, she noticed his weird state and asked if all was well. Of course. Gustav replied that everything was all right. Sometimes he would get a soothing feeling that caused his actions to delay. Even though it was only for a split second, Miss Amy would notice it because Gustav hardly paused for a millisecond during a battle. His brain was always in full mode, thinking and plotting. Before his first attack has landed, he was already preparing for the second and third, but this time it wasn't quite so. He already decided that the next time he was going to try out recreation, he would lock himself indoors until it was done combining the two bloodlines. Miss Amy could see Gustav staring into thin air sometimes, which gave her a weird feeling, but since he said he was okay, she decided not to pursue it. After their training ended for the day, Gustav went home immediately. He didn't want to stick around to embarrass himself by mistake or something. He got home and sat on his bed. He distributed today's points from completing daily tasks first. He placed everything in defense since he wanted to raise it as high as the rest. Add 5 points to defense. Plus 5 points has been added to defense. Gustav was finally starting to sense a little bit of change in his body after defense reached 15 points. He would have loved to test it out, but at the moment there was nothing he could use to test out his defense, and he was more worried about recreation right now. He decided to check the progress again. Combination procedure 57, 89%/100%. Gustav lied on his bed in frustration after seeing the progress. He knew it would still take till the end of the next day before it would be done. Gustav was thinking about staying indoors the next day, but he decided not to because of his training with Miss Amy. He only trained with her 3 days of the week now, so he didn't want to miss any days. Gustav. The night quickly passed once again, and the next day came. Gustav was feeling excited when he woke up because he was sure the combination would be finished today. He checked the progress once again. Combination procedure 78, 57%/100%. He got prepared to leave home for school. After Gustav got to school, he started feeling a kind of hotness from within. Gustav hissed in pain as he felt his blood bubbling again. Combination procedure 80%/100%. He noticed it was at 80%, which meant it was closer to completion. He guessed that this was the reason for the burning feeling within. After a while, the hot feeling was replaced by the refreshing feeling again. Gustav was already starting to regret coming to school because when the feeling of hotness came, he was forced to stop his steps. Also, he noticed something around his pants area that he never thought would be possible for him to develop right now. He walked to the kitchen and asked Boss Danzo for a break today. This came as a surprise to Boss Danzo, and he asked if Gustav was all right. Gustav only told him he needed to rest, and Boss Danzo gave his consent. Gustav went to class and sat there alone. It was still very early in the morning, so there was not a single student to be seen in the class. Gustav just sat there trying to calm his urges till students began to stream into the class. The first 2 who arrived were surprised to see him in class by that time. Unlike before where they might have uttered snide remarks, they ignored him and went to their seats. When the class became filled, discussions of the upcoming exchange event could be heard again. Gustav just blocked his mind from the class and focused on calming himself. Throughout the day, he was absent-minded. He later went to the dojo to train with Miss Amy after the day had ended. Pa, 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 pa. Miss Amy was currently using a long staff-like weapon to spar with Gustav. Gustav was holding on to a red weapon that was a mixture of a gun and a broadsword. He rotated 3 times, slamming the sharp part of the weapon onto the staff on Miss Amy's hand. Miss Amy used the lower part of the staff to slap Gustav's weapon towards the side before rotating the staff and slamming the tip on his head twice. Bang! Bam! Gustav fell to the floor after taking that hit. He laid down like a log of wood and breathed in and out profusely. He stayed in that position for a while. What's wrong with you lately? Miss Amy asked with a look of worry. I'm fine, Gustav said and got back up. Let's get back to. Before Gustav completed his statement, he suddenly felt hotness welling up underneath his gut. Ah! Gustav exclaimed with a look of discomfort. Are you all right? Miss Amy asked as she noticed sweat forming on Gustav's face. I'm fine, Gustav muttered again as he felt the hotness being subdued and being replaced with a feeling of intense coolness. He sighed in relief and stared at Miss Amy. I'm fine, he said once again, only for him to notice that Miss Amy's eyes weren't on him instead. Her eyes were focused on a certain part of his body. Oh, I see why you've been spacing out lately. Going through puberty, eh? Miss Amy voiced out with a smirk while staring at Gustav's lower half. Gustav followed her line of sight down and stared at himself. His eyes widened as he saw the huge bulge protruding in between his upper thighs. The bulge was so huge that the yukata he was putting on couldn't hide its liveliness. Gustav quickly turned around and with a look of embarrassment and used his hands to cover his privates. It seems to have grown bigger since the last time I saw it. So much life and vigor. I wonder if you've been thinking of doing that with a girl lately. Anyways, congratulations. You've gone from having a thumb to A. Before Miss Amy could complete her statement, Gustav interrupted her. Miss Amy, why in the hell are you staring? Gustav voiced out in dissatisfaction. You pointed it at me like a gun. Of course, I'll stare at it, Miss Amy said with a burst of playful laughter. Chapter 84. Gustav felt like entering into a hole to hide at this moment. His face had become slightly red. Damn recreation. How could you embarrass me like this? Gustav still used his palms to cover up his bulge. The bulge was still as strong as ever, and it didn't seem like it would be coming down soon. Excuse me, Miss Amy, Gustav said and ran towards one of the rooms. Miss Amy smiled playfully before answering. You're free to go masturbate for a few minutes. Just make sure you clean up properly. Gustav, who had entered the room, heard that and nearly tripped over himself. He moved towards the bathroom and locked himself in. He sat on the toilet seat in front and checked the progress of the combination. Combination procedure 99, 89%/100%. Gustav felt the bulge earlier was because the combination was almost done. Only a few more to go. Gustav decided to wait for it to finish combining before deciding to leave the room. Even with the low amount left. Almost an hour went by before Gustav finally saw the notification appear in his line of sight. Recreation successful. The feeling of discomfort mixed with comfort finally disappeared and Gustav could no longer sense both bloodlines within his body. He could only sense one right now. Energy transmutation and gravity charge bloodline have been successfully mixed. A B-grade bloodline has been created. Gustav felt like his eyes were deceiving him. B-grade bloodline. He muttered softly with a surprised look. He stared at the new notification that appeared, which displayed the name as well as the ability of the new bloodline. Wow! Gustav exclaimed in surprise after reading what the bloodline could do. 2 weeks later. 2 weeks had gone by in a flash. During these 2 weeks, Gustav had spent the time training, and he had also killed 2 mixed breeds in the past 2 weeks. His defense now had the same amount of points as the rest of his attributes. He had also been learning how to make use of his new bloodline, but he was still lacking in controlling it. Gustav wore a red leather jacket and pants that were tight-fitted, making him look athletic. He was heading to school at this moment. He wasn't the only one headed to school like this. Other students also had red leather jackets and pants on. An insignia of their school was placed on the right breast pocket area. Immediately Gustav got to school, he noticed that everywhere was bustling with life. It was still 6 a.m. in the morning, so this was a pretty abnormal time for students to be in school, but it was finally time for the exchange event to take place. The The students streaming into the school were students of Class 3. They all had excited looks on their faces as they headed towards the school hall where the principal would brief them before they were asked to board the bus. It looked as if they weren't traveling anywhere since they weren't packing any pieces of luggage, but the students of Class 3 had packed their luggage and all their necessities inside their storage device. No one would need to carry pieces of luggage when traveling since storage devices were available. The principal briefed them in that hall about the rules and what they would be experiencing over there. How they had to be respectful, which Gustav called bullshit internally. He talked for about 5 minutes more before leaving the podium and telling the students to head towards the bus. 3 big violet-colored buses floating above the ground were waiting for them in the parking lot. All the teachers were allowed to come with them, but some of them decided to stay back. Miss Amy included. She already told Gustav beforehand that she wouldn't be attending, so he had to be careful in Atrahea City, which, according to her, wasn't as safe as Plankton City. The students went into the buses one after the other. Each bus was big enough to contain up to 40 people, and there were a little over 100 students in Class 3, so the buses were enough to contain everyone. Even when Gustav entered, he was still thinking about the neighborhood. He killed a mixed breed last night, which meant mixed breeds were unlikely to appear again until after a week. The exchange event was only 3 days, so he had enough time, but he was still worried. He kept thinking, what if another mixed breed attacks the neighborhood while I'm gone? Gustav was only traveling with them because he wanted to cross the border and inspect it on a closer scale. He didn't even want to stay there for more than a day after crossing the border, but no one was allowed to leave until the exchange event was over. Gustav sat at the back inside the bus beside the window and brought out a headphone. He wasn't privileged to have this before, but now he would listen to music as they traveled, even though he knew traveling wouldn't take long due to speed. Besides him was a girl with white hair who occasionally stole glances at him from the side, but he wasn't paying attention to anyone on the bus. The bus engine finally started, and then it zoomed off. Zwinin! Just as Gustav expected, when the bus arrived outside the school premises, it turned towards the road that led to his apartment area. The bus streamed across the road in midair. There was a large teleportation ring ahead, which it drove into. Sweeyai! They were in a world of blue and black for a few seconds before an opening appeared in front of their bus. Zoom! The bus entered the opening, and they arrived at the edge of the city, where Gustav's neighborhood was located. He wasn't surprised since this was the closest route to get to Atrahea City. He already did his research earlier. The bus kept moving forward. It passed through the road that led to the middle of the forest region behind. In a few seconds, they were already transversing across the road in between the sparse forest region. Gustav could already see the border up ahead. The familiar blue and green glowing lines on both sides of the road could be seen. Normally, Gustav was always on the left side of the sparse forest region. He never went to the right, but now he could both sides. The bus kept driving and was closing in on the barricaded route up ahead. Once it crossed the next 3,000 meters, it would finally be in between the barricaded borders, which were on the right and left side of the road. Zoom! It only took a few seconds for the bus to arrive in between. The students could no longer see the forest areas on the left and right. Only glowing walls in form of blue and green lines could be seen. The walls were thousands of meters tall and very long, so that was all they could see for miles. A notification popped up in Gustav's line of sight immediately the bus arrived in between the barricaded borders. Energy installment has been activated. Chapter 85. Energy installment has been activated. What? Gustav stared at the notification with a look of panic. The green and blue lines barricading the road on both sides suddenly started to twitch and blink. At first, it was barely noticeable before the lines started blinking repeatedly and swaying, before extending towards their bus. Gasp! Dash, is it supposed to do that? Dash, why does it look like it's getting closer? Dash, it's moving? Dash, it's coming? There was panic in the bus as everyone noticed that the barricaded glowing lines on both sides started pulling towards them like it was elastic. The lines were causing the space within the road to reduce. The barricaded lines were boxing them in. Even the teachers on the buses couldn't understand. They were trying to make sense of what was happening. Why is the barrier moving towards our bus? These were the thoughts on their minds. Gustav's face was twisting in discomfort as the lines kept extending towards their bus. Everyone knew what would happen if it made contact. Their bus was likely to turn into ashes due to the intense amount of energy radiating from the lines converging towards. Dash, we're gonna die. Ruckus, ruckus, ruckus. Chaos erupted in the bus as some of the students started screaming out in fear. Everyone calmed down. One of the teachers in front shouted out. They also couldn't understand why this was happening, but they still tried calming the students down. All of a sudden, the lines stopped extending towards them. They suddenly started to retract before completely moving back to their initial position. The teachers sighed in relief as the bus quieted down after seeing that happen. They were about to make a move if the lines came any closer. The teachers assured the students again that they were safe and a test was probably going on, which was the reason for this. The bus went back to its liveliness after a while, and what happened here was quickly forgotten. At the back left corner, Gustav had sweat running down his forehead, even though the temperature in the bus was well-conditioned. He sighed in relief as he stared at the notification that appeared in his line of sight. Energy installment has been deactivated. Excess energy accumulated, disappeared. Good thing I was able to stop it this time. It didn't even allow me to control the amount that is being gathered. I would have surely exploded to pieces. Gustav was internally grateful that he was able to stop the ability before the lines made contact with the bus. Even though what happened a while ago was very dangerous, it also made him inspect the border on a closer scale. It was just as he suspected. The border was made from energy crystals. He remembered the dangerous force he sensed within the underground facility was similar to this, but not as unstable. He felt that this was related to the fact that the dangerous force was energy crystals being mixed. The other difference was he felt a certain kind of resonance with a particular bloodline inside his body. Beast transformation bloodline. Even with the fast speed of the bus, traveling through the middle of the border took up to 2 hours. It was more than 3,000 miles after all. When they were getting to the end, they could see the road ahead blocked completely by the red and blue lines. They could also see men in armor-like outfits standing there. A small building was also constructed. The men in armor-like uniforms inspected the bus with a triangular machine that was more than 2 meters tall. It scanned the bus with blue rays of light before an opening was created within the lines, like barrier which the bus drove through. After driving through the opening, they had arrived in front of a long and wide bridge. The forest and the first border were behind them, while in front of them was the large bridge which had a body of water underneath it. There was a spatial ring on the bridge, which the bus drove into. Since the incident passed, Gustav had been listening to music and looking through the window to check the environment. Zoom! The bus entered into the spatial ring and arrived on a road in the middle of plain fields. There was nothing to be seen on both sides for miles. Ahead, a huge sign could be seen. Welcome to Atrahia City. It was floating in midair ahead. Some blue-like flames were responsible for suspending it in midair. They could finally see the big city up ahead. From what they could see, the structures were similar to that of Plankton City. They passed through the city checkpoints after some procedures and were now driving through the city. Gustav was surprised that, unlike Plankton City, there was no border preventing mixed breeds from coming in, which had him wondering how they prevented mixed breeds from coming in because, since they arrived in the city, not a single one could be spotted. If they weren't using a border to block mixed breeds, shouldn't the city be full of them? Another thing was he couldn't see the teleportation circles that existed in Plankton City here. There were structures on the roads constructed for easy movement of pedestrians. There were several differences between Plankton City and Atrahia City. Atrahia City seemed less advanced in technology. Some of the things he could see as they traveled across the road were floating structures. There was a particular building they passed through that was actually floating across the surface of the ground. He suspected that this was a normal thing around here, and he wasn't wrong. Plankton City specialized in spatial constructions and some other things, while Atrahia specialized in flights and spacecrafts. According to their history, they could make anything fly, including a house. A house could be turned into a jet. Something could be seen in the skies, positioned in the middle of the city. They had no idea what it was due to its distance from the ground, but they noticed that it looked like a spaceship. After the bus traveled for some minutes, turning left and right repeatedly, they could see a 300-story building that was looking extremely luxurious. The glass panes of the building were so smooth and shiny that could be mistaken for a body of clean water. This particular area was bustling with activity. People moved to and fro across the area. People in luxurious outfits could be seen streaming into the vicinity. In front of the vicinity, which was barricaded, a sign could be seen that said, Atrahia Lodgings and Resorts. After the bus received clearance, it was allowed to drive in. What appeared in their line of sight once they arrived inside was a neat and beautiful environment. There were small houses located in several parts and a water body that was similar to a beach positioned on the west. The bus dropped the students in the parking lot, and the teachers asked everyone to follow them after they got down. Chapter 86. The other buses also arrived, and everyone got down and followed the teachers and principal. The people within the environment stared at the hundreds of students with a look of astonishment. They gave off a particular kind of lively vibe with the red outfit they were clad in. From their young faces, they could already tell that these were students. The students walked towards the large 300-story building up ahead. Once they got to the front, a man and young lady clad in business outfits came out of the building to receive them. "Ah, Mr. Irwin, welcome to Atrahia City." The man walked towards Echelon Academy principal, who was a bald man. They shook hands and exchanged pleasantries. The man also greeted the rest of the teachers and waved to the students before they walked into the building. The interiors were very beautiful and neat-looking. The ground floor was designed to look like they were in a garden of different types of flowers. These were actually projections coming from the walls and floors. It wasn't actually a garden. A feminine statue made of ice block could be seen in the middle. It was oozing so much coldness from the looks of things, but the environment was warm. Beautiful ladies in pink robes could be seen moving about the place. They were workers here. The environment gave off a soothing vibe. The students were lodged in at the reception area before they were taken to the 234th floor. Male and female students were not allowed to stay together, so the floor was divided into two. The first half was given to boys, and the second half were given to girls. 5 students would occupy a single room. The rooms were shared, and Gustav happened to be in room 786C, along with 4 other male students, of course. Gustav was given the key to the room, and the 4 followed behind him. 2 of them with unwilling faces, while the other 2 weren't bothered. Dash! Why did the principal give this trash the key? One of them couldn't just help but voice out with dissatisfaction. "Idiots will always complain over every single thing," Gustav muttered with an unbothered expression. The student who spoke earlier was a boy with dark green hair. When he heard Gustav say that, his face twisted in annoyance, but before he could retort, the other student beside him tapped him and gave him an eye signal. He decided to keep quiet after receiving the signal. They got to their room, which was big and luxurious enough to contain even 10 people if they wanted. 5 beds were placed in 5 separate spots, 2 on the left and 3 on the right. The walls were practically screens as they displayed different kinds of digital images. The room had a balcony up ahead that was very wide. Gustav picked the bed closest to the door, which happened to be on the left side, and brought out his luggage from his storage device. He placed his bag on the bed and turned around to leave the room. The students have been told to head to the multipurpose hall 2 hours from now. According to their principal, other school students would also be there, and Atrahia City High School principal would be addressing everyone. It was still around 8 a.m. Gustav wanted to familiarize himself with the environment for the next 2 hours. It was his first time visiting another city after all. If he had a guide, he would even leave the hotel to see other places, but he didn't, so he still had to stay within the vicinity. There were different places within the hotel. One of the places Gustav visited first was the mountain forest side, which was said to contain exotic and rare animals. Gustav wanted to use this as a form of research, since it was hard to see normal animals nowadays. Almost all the life forms on Earth had mutated. The combination of Slarkovs and humans was also a kind of mutation. He wasn't the only one moving around the vicinity during this time. Some other students decided to check out the environment too. The forest area was a kind of highland located on the east side of the hotel environs. Gustav went together with a group because, according to the protocols of the place, moving alone around there wasn't allowed. Almost 2 hours later, Gustav was returning to his room on the 234th floor. Elephants, tigers, baboons, chimpanzees, squirrel. So more creatures existed outside of mixed breeds. Gustav muttered softly with a contemplative look as he stood within the elevator. He had seen different kinds of creatures today, and he was surprised to find out that more normal animals existed. He thought every creature besides humans, Slarkovs, mixed bloods, birds, and a few other normal animals that he had seen before would be mixed breeds. One couldn't find these animals in Plankton City. That was the reason for his surprise. He got out of the elevator and walked to his room. Room 786C was the 23rd room on the left side within the corridor. Gustav arrived before his room and used the facial recognition registered there after their entry earlier to gain access. He walked into the room, which was noisy earlier but quieted down upon his arrival. He stared at his bed and noticed someone lying on it. "Where's my luggage?" Gustav asked with a cool gaze. The person lying on his bed was the same student who was dissatisfied with the principal giving Gustav the key. The boy with the green hair was named Wally. "Why don't you look over there?" Wally pointed at the balcony area. Gustav followed his line of sight and noticed his rectangular luggage sitting there. "And why are you on my bed?" Gustav asked another question. "Haha, because this bed is mine now." Wally voiced out with a burst of light laughter. The rest of the students were also in their beds. The bed beside the one Gustav picked was occupied by Wally's friend, while the two on the right were occupied by the other two. The only other bed available was the one closest to the balcony. "Oh, I see," Gustav said with a smirk and turned around. He moved to the door and used the key to lock it, so no one would be able to leave even if they tried to use facial recognition. Click! The clicking of the door was heard. Gustav turned around after he finished locking the door. "Why are you locking the door?" Wally asked. Chapter 87. Why are you locking the door? Wally asked with a look of suspicion. Gustav didn't reply to him. After he locked the door, he turned around and started walking towards Wally. "Why are you folding your sleeves?" Wally asked another question. "So I won't get blood on them," Gustav answered while walking towards Wally and folding both his sleeves. Wally was still looking confused, but before he could think any further, Gustav had arrived in front of him. "Hey, trash, if you think—" Before he could complete his sentence, Gustav swung his fist towards Wally's left cheek. Bang! The force of the punch sent Wally Bodis towards the side. Bam! His face slammed into the wall and blood started trickling down his forehead. Gustav didn't even wait for a second more before sending another punch towards his face. Bang! The fist slammed into his left cheek again, sending him crashing towards the wall once again. Bam! The right side of his face slammed into the wall, causing him to tilt towards the left side after contact was made. Bang! Bam! Bang! Bam, bang, bam, bang. It became like a game of tennis as Gustav kept punching Wally's face towards the wall, causing the same action to repeat itself numerous times. The other boys in the room had their mouths wide open in shock as they watched Wally continuously receiving numerous punches. They couldn't fathom what was happening right now. Isn't he said to be trash? Why is Wally receiving such a beating and not fighting back? They had such questions running through their minds as they stared at the unbelievable scene. Currently, Wally's left cheek was very swollen and red, like a huge boil, while the right side of his face had blood trickling down. There was a huge swell on his forehead and eye. Even with all this, Gustav didn't stop. He kept punching Wally's face, causing his head to slam onto the wall, then bounce back to him before receiving another. "If you're not beaten up, you won't receive sense," Gustav voiced out as his fist kept swinging out like lightning. It wasn't that Wally didn't want to fight back, instead he couldn't. He hadn't even been allowed to complete a thought since Gustav's fist started raining upon his face. He was helpless and defenseless like a chicken before Gustav. "You bastard trash, what are you doing to Wally?" Wally's friend, who occupied the bed in front, lunged towards Gustav. His arm turned into a blade, and he stabbed it forward at Gustav. Gustav, who was still punching Wally, suddenly swerved to the side, dodging the blade smoothly. While Wally's friend was still moving across the air, Gustav swung his palm towards his cheek. "Pa!" A hot slap reverberated across the place as the boy slammed his forehead onto the floor after receiving the heavy slap from Gustav. Bang! Immediately, Wally's friend's head hit the floor. Gustav swung his foot at his face. Bam! His foot slammed into the boy's face, catapulting him towards the wall. Gustav stretched out his leg and slammed the boy's face into the wall again with his foot. Blam! 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 He stomped on his face repeatedly before placing his foot down. The boy had already passed out from the intense and multiple kicks. Gustav turned around to face Wally, who was currently laying on the ground. He grabbed onto Wally's head with his right hand and lifted him again. Wally's eyes were still rotating due to the intense punching session he received earlier, so he hadn't come back to his senses. "Pa!" Gustav gave him another slap to the face. "Kyer!" He screamed out as his swollen cheek busted with blood splattering across the place. "For placing your stinking body on my bed, I should at least break a few bones, don't you think?" Gustav voiced out as he grabbed Wally's left arm. Wally, who was still screaming in pain, tried yanking his hand back, but it was of no use. He couldn't contend with Gustav in terms of strength. Gustav clenched tightly onto Wally's wrist and twisted it. KRRYYKK. A loud sound of bones breaking could be heard as Wally's right arm was twisted anti-clockwise. "Kyer!" He screamed out again. Gustav grabbed his fingers. "We're not done yet," he muttered with a smirk. Pop! 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 The sounds of bone popping reverberated across the room. Wally's fingers had been broken. They were bent completely to the back. Gustav!" One of the boys on the other bed called out with a look of fright. What is it?" Gustav asked with an intense glare. "Do you intend to partake in his suffering?" he asked. The boy had his mouth wide open, and all the words that he wanted to say initially got stuck in his throat. "I can assure you that if you plan on assisting them, you will suffer the same fate. If you think it's a bluff, stand up from your bed," Gustav warned with a smirk. The boy shut his mouth after hearing that and sat on his bed properly without the intention of standing up. Based on what he had seen here, he knew that he had no chance against Gustav. Also, he felt Wally brought this upon himself, so why would he join him to partake of his suffering? Even though he didn't completely agree with what was going on, he decided to sit down silently and watch, same as the other boy. "That's for the left arm. Now, let's move to the right." Gustav brought his focus back on Wally, who was still whimpering in pain. Wally stared at Gustav with a look of unwillingness as he tried wrestling himself out of Gustav's grip again, but it was of no use. Gustav held Wally up with his right hand now, and used his left hand to clench Wally's left arm. KRRYYKK. Another round of screaming started again. Several minutes later, Wally was on hanging from the ceiling with a rope. His hands were tied behind his back, and as his body loosely hung above the ground. His clothes were pulled off, and he was currently wearing white panties. There were red marks all over his body, and his expression depicted that he had gone through hell. Even if he wanted to use his bloodline at this moment, he couldn't due to the beating he had received. Also, it would be pointless since he would just be beaten to submission again. Wally's eyes slightly opened wider, and he stared at Gustav like he was looking at a demon. "Now, do you still want my bed?" Gustav stared into his dim eyes and asked with a threatening gaze. "And no, PPLSA Luti MEGO," Wally begged. "All right, I'll let you go, but you have to understand that my service isn't free," Gustav said with a smile. "Service?" Wally questioned with a look of confusion. "Yes, service. I spent more than 30 minutes teaching you manners. Do you think I wouldn't receive payment for that?" Gustav said with a solemn look. Wally felt like he was going to pass out again from hearing Gustav's words. This is the most shameless bullying I have ever seen. He felt just Gustav's words were enough to anger even the devil. "Come on, don't waste my time," Gustav voiced out again. "How W Moosey H?" Wally forced this question out of his mouth. "Not very expensive. 20,000 rad should do." Gustav replied, "Ak, 20,000 rad." Wally felt like he didn't hear properly. "Are you going to pay or what?" "Mind you, I have a recording of you hanging from the ceiling," Gustav whispered into the ears of Wally, whose eyes widened upon hearing that. "If you want, I can post it on the net. I'm sure you'll get lots of views and likes," Gustav said and turned around. "I agree. I just need to transfer it to you." Wally quickly shouted out to stop Gustav from walking away. "Ah, you've made me spend too much time in trying to convince you. The price has gone up to 30,000 now," Gustav said while shrugging. Wally nearly had a mental breakdown upon hearing that. But... Before he could complete his sentence, Gustav cut him short. "If you keep arguing, the price will keep increasing." "Are you sure you want that?" Wally quickly stopped arguing and agreed to the new price again. Gustav nodded and let him down. The transaction was done, and Gustav had gained another 30,000 rad. Gustav allowed Wally and his friend Dojer to use healing pills. "By the way, you all are free to tell everyone what happened here." "It's not like they'll believe you anyways." Gustav laughed lightly and stepped out of the room. It was already time for students to gather in the multipurpose hall. Every floor was very large, so each one had a hall, but this floor's hall wasn't the one that was going to be used. They would be using the hall that was located on the 100th and 50th floor, which was where Gustav was headed right now. He already left the boys in the room to their thoughts. He wasn't bothered because he knew they wouldn't even have the guts to mention what happened there in the public. While heading there, Gustav saw a notification appear in his line of sight once again. Hidden quest complete. Chapter 88. Hidden quest completed. Dominate your roommates. Rewards plus 10,000 EXP. Plus 5 extra attributes points. Gustav smiled as he traveled towards the hall. Looks like dealing with idiots always comes with rewards. Inside a large and luxurious-looking hall, teenagers in different outfits could be seen streaming in. They moved in groups as they walked into the hall. Those wearing the same color of outfits were moving in together. These were students from different schools in nearby cities that were also invited to participate in the exchange event. Students from the same school sat around one another, so it was like a bundle of colors packed together, making the hall look a certain kind of unique way. Gustav sat amongst this large crowd, of course. The principal of Atrahia City High School walked to the podium to address the students. He first welcomed them to the Atrahia City and proceeded to explain how the event was going to be for the next 3 days. The students from other schools were going to tour the city and also tour Atraheus City High School the next day. The day after, they were going to be exchanging knowledge on different subjects and topics. Although it was called Exchange of Knowledge, in reality, it was actually a quiz based on the knowledge and intelligence of the students. Calling it an exchange was a way of covering up the true meaning. The third day, which was the final day, was when the duels were going to take place. The students were pretty much very excited to hear about all this, but they didn't expect that there would be also exchanging knowledge. Which students can I pick to represent us in the exchange of knowledge? Principal Owen, who was seated behind the podium along with other dignitaries, was thinking hard about this. The truth was, when it came to knowledge on normal subjects, the mixed blood students of Echelon Academy in Class 3 weren't very good at this. Unfortunately, no Slarkovs or human came with them. Only mixed bloods from Class 3 attended this exchange event. Most of these mixed bloods only cared about how to increase their strength and were hardly concerned with studying. Obviously, Principal Irwin didn't think that something like this would happen if he did. He would have brought along students that weren't only muscle-brained. The principal of Atraheus City High School kept speaking about some other things for a few minutes before leaving the podium. A round of applause resounded as he walked back to his seat. The vice principal came on the stage and announced the names of the schools participating in the exchange event. There were up to 12 schools participating in the event. 2 happened to come from Plankton City, which was Echelon Academy and Black Rock schools. The rest of the schools were Sherrill High, Brer Bullet High, Eagle Wings High, Reflection Academy, Mount Eve High, etc. All of these schools were from neighboring cities. There were about 1,000 students present in the hall at this moment. After the vice principal finished announcing the list of schools participating in the event, he mentioned the time that students were supposed to gather for the tour and how they were going to be grouped. Since they wanted students from other schools to mingle with one another, they decided that students from different schools would be grouped together. Gustav just listened from his current position while yawning occasionally. He wasn't even interested in the exchange event anymore. He wasn't only a bit interested in seeing different parts of the city. After a few more minutes, the meeting ended and students were permitted to return to their rooms. Of course, they were also free to wander around the vicinity. The students left the hall in droves. Gustav was walking within the large crowd when he heard his name. Gustav Oslov, come to the east side of the hall. A loud voice announced. The students of Echelon Academy recognized this voice. It belonged to Principal Irwin. His voice was louder than a mega speaker, which was why it reverberated across the entire hall. This was Principal Irwin's bloodline ability at work. He could amplify sound multiple times if he wanted to. TCH, what does he want? Gustav was irritated by being called out like that and being referred to as Oslov. The students from other schools were already wondering who this Gustav was for him to be called out like that. They had no idea what he was being called for, but they felt he had to be a big shot. Only the students of Echelon Academy were shocked and confused at Principal Irwin's call. They wondered why Principal Irwin would want to meet with the well-renowned trash of their class. A girl with long black hair had an uncomfortable look after hearing Gustav's name. She seemed to be moving with a group of friends earlier, but paused in her tracks upon hearing his name. What are you doing, Yahiko? Let's go. One of the girls around her brought her out of her thoughts by calling out to her. So RRY, let's go, she muttered in a low tone and proceeded to keep moving with her friends. Gustav had to turn around and start heading back into the hall after hearing the call. He was practically moving against the current since everyone was heading out, but surprisingly no one made contact with him till he got to his destination. He arrived at the east side of the hall and noticed Principal Irwin and Vice Principal Mark waiting by the side. The principal seemed to have a look of relief when he saw Gustav walking towards them. Gustav arrived in front of them and stared at Principal Irwin with an aloof look. What did you call for me, Principal Irwin? Gustav asked in a cool tone. Good thing you're here, Gustav, Principal Irwin started by saying. As you must have heard, there will be an exchange of knowledge the day after tomorrow. That is what they called it, but I'm sure someone as smart as you are must have figured that it's just another competition. Principal Owen added. Chapter 89. What exactly are you getting at, Principal Owen? Please go straight to the point, Gustav demanded with an irritated expression. Principal Irwin gave a wry smile and continued speaking. We hardly have any good student who can represent us, so we're hoping you can take our beloved school into account and be the main student who represents Echelon Academy for the exchange of knowledge. Gustav stared at the principal, then at the vice principal before staring at the principal again. Why should I represent the school? I'm a useless trash after all, Gustav asked with a look of confusion. You're not trash, Gustav. We all know that none of the other students are academically as bright as you are. Please don't let our school name be dragged into the mud during the knowledge exchange. We need to maintain our prestige. The other schools will not let us hear the end of it if our school comes last. They will not hesitate to poke fun at us. So please we implore you to represent the school. Principal Irwin proposed once again after a lengthy explanation. Gustav stared at him for several seconds with a poker face, causing the atmosphere to be awkward. No, I'm trash. Gustav turned him down and turned around to leave. This trash will mess up your glorious school even more, so you should pick one of those students who are not considered trash. Gustav started walking away after saying that. Wait, Principal Owen called out to him. Gustav paused his steps and turned his head around to stare at him. What can I do to make you represent the school? Is there something you want? Principal Irwin asked. Gustav smirked internally so many things. Sadly, my hands are tied here. He recalled something while speaking internally. I'm not interested, he replied and turned around to leave. The principal wanted to call out to him again, but Gustav had already disappeared into the distance after walking at a very quick pace. The vice principal had a look of displeasure on his face. Can't we just force him? Vice Principal Mark proposed. I'm afraid we can't even lay a finger on him, Principal Irwin said with a defeated expression. What do we do now, Principal Irwin? Vice Principal Mark asked. We have no choice but to pick from the long list of mixed bloods that came with us. Let's pick those who don't have very bad grades in other subjects, Principal Irwin sighed after he finished speaking. Gustav had left the hall at this moment and was heading back to his room. He snickered internally as he remembered what happened a while ago. All of a sudden, I'm no longer trash now that y'all need me. Hypocrites! Gustav had the urge to laugh till he was rolling on the ground. Fools! I would have made y'all spend some money if not for my bet with Miss Amy, Gustav said internally with a big grin plastered across his face. Gustav! An excited feminine voice called out to him from the side of the corridor. Gustav turned to look at the person who had called him. He sighted a gorgeous female leaning on the glass walls at the right side. She had silver and pink shoulder-length hair with two small horns protruding out of her forehead. She was clad in a black sports outfit, making her figure look extremely athletic and attractive. Fancy meeting you here, Gustav smirked as he walked towards her. Angie, Gustav. Both of them voiced out at the same time as they approached each other. Angie's face glowed up. I knew it was going to be you when I heard that name, she voiced out with a look of excitement. Oh, I see. For someone who's meeting a student from an opposing school, you seem rather excited, Gustav said. On, well. Angie's face turned a shade of red as she joined her palms together. Is there any reason why you waited for me here? Gustav asked. Huh? Is there supposed to be a reason? Angie asked with a confused but cute expression. Of course. Or you're already used to the habit of waiting in front of my door, and you just decided to use this place as a door also to block my movement, Gustav said with a contemplative look. Now you make me sound like a stalker. Angie said while looking down. Yes, you are a stalker, Gustav answered bluntly. Angie's face looked more down upon hearing that. Haha, I'm just messing with you. Gustav laughed lightly and proceeded to walk forward. Gustav, you mean it? Angie voiced out while pouting and stomping her feet on the floor. You coming? Gustav said while turning around to stare at her. Huh, where are we going? She asked while walking towards Gustav in front. Sightseeing. It's cool if you don't want to come. It won't do you any good to be seen with trash. Gustav turned around to keep walking. Trash? What's that? I don't care about that. Who said I don't want to come? I'm coming with you. She increased her pace and caught up with Gustav. Gustav just smirked and kept walking. All right then, let's go. Gustav arrived back in his room after at night around 8 p.m. He had spent more than 6 hours with Angie. They walked around the hotel, visiting different places floor by floor. Where they spent a lot of time was in an arcade park where games were played. Gustav was surprised to see so many fun games and gadgets. He especially liked the virtual reality games a lot, where he only had to use his mind to play. There were quite a lot of them, but the one he liked the most was one where he was piloting a spacecraft. He had always wanted to go to space, so the feeling of being completely immersed in the game, which was like going to space for real, was second to none for him. He learned how to play and even competed with some people there. Most of them kept asking if he was actually a beginner, like he said he was due to the way he learned fast. I guess it's not as boring as I expected it to be. Hopefully, tomorrow's tour brings some fun like this too, Gustav muttered while lying on his bed. When he arrived a few moments ago, the room became silent. His roommates didn't have the guts to converse normally in his presence. Gustav wasn't bothered by this. In fact, he was hoping it continued this way for the next 3 days. The silence wasn't a bad thing to him. Chapter 90. The next morning, students woke very early and prepared themselves for the exchange event. The students were grouped into hundreds. About 8 students from every school were placed in a group. Students from other schools were given the chance to mingle with one another this way. They were put in buses according to their groups. According to Atrahia City High School principal, the groups would be visiting different places in the city, so there won't be a crowd in a particular location. Which meant when Group A was visiting the heart of the city, Group B would be in another location at that moment. Same with other groups also. At the end of the day, they would all visit the same places but at different times. Gustav was placed in a group with some mixed bloods from his class who mostly glared at him with contempt, mixed with wariness. Their group was headed for a place known as Site Number 47 at the coast of the city. There were 5 girls from his class in the group. The remaining 3 were boys. Only 2 of the 7 students didn't glare at him in a weird manner, but the same couldn't be said for the rest. One of them in particular couldn't look him in the eyes. She would occasionally turn to look at him, then turn her face away in embarrassment. Why am I placed in the same group with him? She bit her lower lip in frustration as she wondered. This was Yuhiko, the same girl that received a beating from Gustav in the dojo. When Gustav entered the bus with these students, he didn't even take a single glance at any one of them. No wonder the air smells foul. It stinks of trash. One of the girls sitting beside Yuhiko voiced while glaring at Gustav. Right, Yuhiko? She asked Yuhiko, who was absent-minded. Hey, Yuhiko! She called out again after noticing the absent-minded look on Yuhiko's face. I said, doesn't it reek of trash here? She asked again while turning to the side to stare at Gustav, who ignored her jaunts. Yuhiko heard that, and her eyes slightly widened as she turned her face to stare at Gustav. Gustav turned his head to stare at her also. His expression was brimming with extreme aloofness as he made eye contact with Yuhiko. I guess this world will never lack idiots. What will you say, Yuhiko? How will you respond? Gustav leaned his arm against the window side and placed his jaw on his fist as a small smirk formed on his face. Yuhiko quickly turned her face around in embarrassment and stared at the person sitting beside her. Shut up, bitch. Yuhiko shouted out and gave her a slap across her cheek. Pa! Everyone was shocked at the sudden development. What was the reason for Yuhiko's extreme reaction? Even Gustav hadn't expected that she was going to react that way. WHY DD me. The girl held her face and voiced out with a look of pain and confusion. You can see that we're in a public place in another city entirely. We're supposed to be united. Learn to have manners, Yuhiko said with a look of justice. The students within the bus stared at her saint-like expression with a look of understanding. The Echelon Academy students in the bus too knew Yuhiko for her saint-like attitude, so they also felt it was understandable. She's standing up for the trash, even though he had the guts to ask her out in the past. This was their thought process. Gustav already knew what the situation looked like, but he wasn't bothered. He only laughed internally. The students from other schools started wondering why the girl referred to one of their own as trash in the first place. A girl with white hair walked over to Gustav's position and sat beside him. Gustav noticed that she was the same girl that sat beside him during their trip to Atrahia City. Hello, she greeted Gustav in a low tone. Gustav turned to stare at her for a few seconds before turning back to face the window. What do you want? Gustav questioned with a look of suspicion. He felt it wasn't a coincidence for them to sit together twice, especially when she was seated in another part of the bus earlier. Also, he felt that anyone from his class who tried initiating a conversation with him would have some kind of ulterior motive. Another thing was she was also kind of popular in Class 3, but she was the type that always refrained from putting her nose in other people's business. From what Gustav remembered, she was easygoing but also ignorant. He didn't have any reason to dislike her, but he also didn't have any reason to like her. I just want to be friends, she said in a friendly manner. Matilda, she said while stretching out her hand towards Gustav in a bid to shake him. I'm not interested, Gustav said without turning to even look at her. Matilda had to drop her hand back down before she started speaking again. Isn't this city nice? There are a lot of things here that aren't present in ours. She spoke with a smile while looking through the window. The bus was passed through different routes, and they had streaked past several flying structures in the process. Some mechanical-looking birds also flew across the air in some parts of the city. Some trees planted around had purple, red, white, and several other colors of leaves, causing the city to look naturally colorful. Gustav was fond of nature too, so her words kind of caught his attention, but he still decided not to reply to her. The combination of nature and technology is beauty at its very peak, she said with glittering eyes while looking through the window. You're starting to sound like a buzzing mosquito. What exactly do you want? Gustav asked with a look of displeasure. Ouch, that's a bit mean, she said with a wry smile and looked at Gustav's face hoping for some kind of reaction, but to her disappointment, Gustav still had the look of aloofness on his face. I just want to be your friend, she said with a pleading look. You've been attending Echelon Academy for years. It's a bit too late to try and become my friend. What are you aiming to achieve by being the friend of trash? Gustav turned around to face her and stared into her eyes after he threw his question at her. The look he gave made her flinch back a little. Chapter 91. He has truly changed. I can't find a single bit of cowardice in his eyes, look, or manner of speaking. Matilda was mesmerized by the way he stared at her without breaking eye contact. I think we both know that you're not trash. At least not anymore, she said while turning her face away. Gustav stared at her suspiciously for a few more seconds before turning to face the window again. I don't know what you're talking about, Gustav said. So you're going to keep playing dumb, eh? Maltida asked. Gustav's suspiciousness towards her was raised by a notch again. So you're also going to keep playing dumb by not telling me your motive for approaching me? Gustav also questioned her. His face was still looking aloof and calm, even though he was suspicious towards her. Yuhiko had been stealing glances at Gustav's seat, which was on the left side and 2 rows behind. Why would Mal Taida approach him? Why are they talking to each other? What are they talking about? Yuhiko kept turning her face towards the back to steal glances at them occasionally. The girl beside her had noticed her weird behavior, but was scared of questioning her due to what happened earlier. She was suspicious about everything now. The way Yuhiko acted with her, due to Gustav, and when she also noticed Mal Taida conversing with Gustav. Gustav kept ignoring Matilda during their journey to site number 47-15 minutes. Later, they had arrived at the coast of the city several minutes ago. This was also the first time Gustav was seeing the sea. He stared at the large body of blue waves that extended for miles with an astonished look. He had only read about it and seen pictures. Site number 47 was located a few miles forward and very close to the sea. To everyone's surprise, site number 47 was not just a place, it was structure. They could already see a large grayish-looking spacecraft before they arrived there. It looked like a divine entity with the way it stood proudly in position. Although it was looking aged, it still had a kind of majestic feel to it. It was shaped to look like the body of a frog without a head and limbs, but the number of technological gadgets placed on different parts made it look menacing. It was as large as 30 soccer fields placed together. It would be impossible for them to visit every part of it if there weren't teleportation circles inside that could assist them with easy travels. This particular location was where one of the very first spacecraft of the Slarkovs landed. It wasn't an ordinary spacecraft like the rest. It was the spacecraft that was used by the chief of Slarkovs, which was why a lot of historical value was placed on it. It had stopped functioning for thousands of years, but it was seen as a relic of old. This spacecraft was one of Atrahia's city's pride and joy. The city was actually founded by the chief of the Slarkovs. When the students were being shown different places inside the ship, they were also being told this information by the guide. Gustav now understood why he had been seeing more mixed bloods that had looked similar to that of Slarkovs within the hotel. Just like Plankton City, the population of humans and Slarkovs had also thinned out, but the mixed bloods here had looked similar to Slarkovs than those in Plankton City. In Plankton City, you could hardly find a mixed blood that had any form of resemblance with Slarkovs. Angie was a rare case. It would be hard to find others like that. Gustav remembered seeing mixed bloods with tentacled beards, some with heads shaped like the mouth of a fish and others with horns like Angie. All these traits came from the DNA of Slarkovs. The guide took them to the lodging room, which was larger than the entire 7th floor Gustav lived in back in Plankton City. After they visited the lodging rooms, he took them to the kitchen. A lot of them were surprised. The spacecraft has a kitchen? The guide noticed the look of confusion on the student's face and explained. Traveling through space isn't a few hours or one-day journey. Depending on the distance, it could take months or even years. Traveling from the Earth right now with the fastest spacecraft to where the Slarkovs planet used to be located would take 2 to 3 months. Back then, when spacecraft weren't as fast, it took the Slarkovs 3 years of journeying through space before they got to Earth, the guide added. It just so happened that the Slarkovs' home planet was more than 3 galaxies away, which meant they traveled millions of light years before getting to Earth. Gustav was surprised that it took that long, and yet Earth was said to be the closest habitable planet for the Slarkovs. What if the Earth wasn't habitable and they had to journey farther? Now he understood why having a kitchen within the spacecraft was necessary, even though it still surprised him. They moved towards the engine room next. The engine room was also pretty large. Even with Gustav's knowledge of technologies, there were still some things that he had never come across. Different build-ups were connected to one another. A cylindrical-shaped, red device hung in the middle of them all. Also, they could see large, square-shaped appliances that were interconnected by large wires thicker than the bodies of 2 human beings placed together. Hypothroblastic megahunter. Magnetic antimatter distributor. Gustav kept muttering some of the items that he could recognize. He was taking note of the way these items were used together in the engine room. The guide stared at him with a look of surprise when he heard Gustav mentioning some of these things with accuracy, but decided not to say anything. Analyzing energy, left within a strobic tank, Gustav suddenly saw this notification pop up when he stared at a large, grayish-looking, tank-like device. Energy left, 0.0000000000027. Gustav stared at the notification with a surprised look. Good thing it didn't activate the other ability this time. Gustav sighed internally in relief. The guide was about to take them to the next location when Gustav called out to him. "Excuse me, you said there was no energy left within the spacecraft anymore, right?" Gustav asked. Yes, the spacecraft had become obsolete thousands of years ago after the Slarkovs descended. "There's not a single drop of power left here," the guide said with a look of certainty. "I think." Before Gustav could complete his sentence, another notification appeared in his line of sight. "Energy installment has been activated. Oh, not again." Chapter 92. Energy installment has been activated. Oh no, not again. Gustav stared at the notification with a wary look. The guide was about to continue his explanation when the entire engine room suddenly lit up. The way the lights came up shocked everyone. The tank-like structure had electric arcs running through its body for a few seconds before a purple glow coated its entire surface. What is going on? Didn't they say it had no power left? This was the question in the minds of everyone. All of a sudden, a loud, mechanical voice rang in their eardrums. "Dangerous species on board. Danger level of this species is above threshold. Annihilation of dangerous species shall now commence." Immediately, those words drifted into the ears of everyone. A large cannon-like weapon pulled out from above the ceiling, and a red beam of light gathered around the nozzle. "Everyone get to the exit," the guide shouted out with a look of panic. Immediately, everyone turned around to run. The cannon shot out the red beam. Boom! Gustav, who was still trying to stop energy installment activation, saw a world of red appear in front of him. It was insanely faster than he could react to, but he subconsciously raised his arms in front of his chest in an X format to block the beam. Bang! It slammed into him with tremendous force, causing his body to be catapulted backward by 500 feet. Ugh! Gustav exclaimed in pain, with his body was flying backward in midair while the red beam covered his entire being. Boom! Gustav's back slammed into the wall of the engine room, causing a 2-meter dent similar to the shape of a human to appear within. Mist circulated from the point of impact, making everyone's vision unclear. Immediately after that beam was shot out, the engine room darkened again, and the cannon lost power. Gasp! Everyone stared in the direction where Gustav was blasted to with a look of surprise, confusion, and panic. Chatter! 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 Dash, is he dead? Dash, he's definitely dead. Dash, that wasn't a simple weapon. Dash, isn't the spacecraft more than 1,000 years old? How does it still have power? Voices of the students within the crowd could be heard. Now that the engine room had lost power, they weren't leaving anymore. They were more curious about what happened to Gustav. They stared at the guide who was currently in front of the dent and was also calling for other personnel to arrive in the engine room as soon as possible. The students of Echelon Academy already believed that Gustav was already dead. Only Matilda had an expression of intrigue, while Yuhiko had her mouth slightly opened in shock. Everything happened way too fast. Even the guide was unable to stop what had just happened. The guide was also a mixed blood, but there was no way he'd be able to move freely when more than 100 students were running out of the engine room in panic. The mist still covered everywhere, so visuality was limited. The guide reached out his hand towards the dent. He wanted to try expanding the dent with his physical strength, so the inside will be exposed and they would be able to see if Gustav was still alive or not. Before the guide's hand could touch the dent, he felt the walls beside the dent vibrate a little. To his surprise, a face pushed itself out of the hole, followed by shoulders, torso, and the rest of the human body. Are you all right? The guide was surprised to see Gustav come out of the hole unscathed. The upper part of his uniform was burnt to a crisp, exposing his well-toned chest and abs. "I'm all right," Gustav said while nodding. Internally, he sighed. There's no point in pretending that I'm not, since regeneration is automatic. Gasp! The students were in shock after seeing Gustav come out of the hole without a single scratch, except for his partly burnt uniform. The students of Echelon Academy were even more shocked seeing this. They questioned how possible this was in their minds, but the only answer they came up with was impossible. They felt it was impossible, yet it happened right before their very eyes, leaving them in confusion. Maltaida, on the other hand, wasn't surprised. She had a look of awe, but her expression did not have a single shred of surprise, almost like she was expecting this. "Look at that body. He must be a powerful, mixed blood," someone from the crowd of students voiced out. Obviously, this person wasn't a student of Echelon Academy and happened to be a female. These words made the other girls stare at Gustav with a look of interest. Some of the girls had their eyes focused on Gustav's body and face. "He's hot." This was the thought on some of their minds, especially after seeing the way he looked so uncaring even after taking that hit. "How are you unharmed?" the guide asked. This was also the same question on everyone's mind. It wasn't as powerful as it was supposed to be, I guess. "It's been thousands of years, so it's normal for its weapons to be weak," Gustav explained. The guard felt this explanation was very plausible, but what didn't make sense to him was the fact that he sensed a lot of power in that attack earlier. According to what he sensed, the power it radiated should be more than what kids of Gustav's age would be able to handle. He stared at Gustav with a look of suspicion. "Are you sure you're all right?" he asked again. "I'm fine." It was no more than a scratch because of how weak it was. It only carried a moving force, not a destructive one, Gustav said once again. The students from Echelon Academy now had looks of understanding. They knew it would be impossible for trash to survive such an attack if it wasn't weak. On the surface, this was an explanation that made them feel relieved, but deep down they felt that it didn't add up, because even a hit like that, no matter how weak, was supposed to put a weakling like Gustav in a hospital. Only the students from other schools totally believed, since they had no idea that Gustav was referred to as trash. The other personnels arrived, and everything was explained to them. They were also shocked and started inspecting the place while the students were guided out of the spacecraft. Gustav took clothes from his storage device and changed his outfit in a secluded part of the spacecraft. This was how their tour of the spacecraft ended. Chapter 93. The students were taken to another part of the city after this. Gustav was now the topic of the day. The students within the bus kept talking about how he took the beam. They believed it was weak, just as he explained, but to them it was a marvelous feat. He captured a lot of attention with what happened earlier. He didn't want to attract this much attention towards himself, but what happened within the spacecraft was very much unexpected. No one knew that such an ancient spacecraft actually still had power. If not for defense, regeneration, and energy installment, I wouldn't have survived that. Gustav recalled the power of the beam as the bus took them to another location. But I also think that the security system was activated in the first place because of energy installment. Gustav came to this conclusion because the security system didn't power on until after energy installment activated without his permission. Gustav recalled the entire process again. When the beam slammed into him, several notifications popped up. Absorbing energy into hidden gravitational space filled. Excess energy is being transferred. He figured that this was the reason the rest of the power in the beam was only enough to inflict injuries on him instead of death. His entire arm was burnt after he slammed into the wall, but it was able to heal up quickly. His defense also played a very important role. Host attributes: name, Gustav level, 8 class. EXP, 82 500/150 000. HP, 1200/1250 energy. 9892800/1000 attributes: strength, 40 perception, 40 mental fortitude, 40 agility, 40 speed, 57 bravery, 40 intelligence, 40 charm, 40 defense, 40 attributes points, 30. He didn't feel as much pain as he felt he was supposed to, even though he felt much danger from the beam when it was shot out. He could have tried dodging the beam, but he was trying to control energy installment because it gives off obvious signs that it was absorbing energy, just like what happened in the bus. Due to this, he stood in the same position. It called me a dangerous species. What does that even mean? Gustav wondered before staring at the panel again. He noticed something when checking the attributes panel for the second time. What's with the energy stats? Energy, 9892800/1000. Gustav was surprised to see the impossible figure in front of the energy stats. He recalled that he received a notification earlier about the excess energy being transferred somewhere. It looks like the excess energy was transferred to the system. How is it so much? Gustav was surprised by this. The energy left inside the astrobic tank was 0. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 2, 7, 3% of its original, and yet it was able to give this amount of energy to both the system and my hidden gravitational space. Gustav couldn't imagine just how much energy the astrobic tank would have contained 100%. He felt 100% might be too overwhelming to think of, since 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 2, 7, 3% could do this much. What do I do with all this excess energy, and how long can it be retained? Gustav was wondering when another notification popped up in his line of sight. Host has acquired enough energy for a system upgrade. System will be upgraded 2 days from now. Countdown: 1 day /23 HRS /59 minutes /59 secs. Gustav squinted his eyes in surprise. The system can be upgraded? 2 hours later, the group Gustav was placed in had visited about 3 other places that were also seen as historical places. One was a museum, and the second was a government technology corporation within the city. During their journeys, lots of students from other schools had initiated a conversation with Gustav and tried to get close to him, but as usual, he wasn't interested in any of them. He only exchanged conversation with a few of them. Matilda kept sticking by his side during this journey. Even though he tried to shake her off, she would find a way to stay beside him. She was being rather persistent, and Gustav was starting to compare her with a certain girl, except for the fact that the other girl didn't have an ulterior motive. Right now, they were headed to a place called the Ancient Market. Just like the name suggested, it was a market, but not the usual modern-day markets. Everything sold within that market was relics of the past. The bus arrived in front of the market, which was crowded, and they got down. The Ancient Market was the only place for buying and selling within the city that was truly like markets of ancient times. Gustav could see rows and columns of stalls constructed neatly around the place. The teachers told them to follow behind as they visited stalls one at a time. The market was so vast that Gustav felt some students would get lost here without a guide. The teachers also told them that they could decide to buy something if they wished. They would go from stalls to stalls observing ancient antiques. Some students who wanted to show off their wealth would decide to buy some things that they didn't need. After a while, the teachers noticed that the students were practically causing a roadblock as they went from one stall to another, so they decided to split up. There were only 2 teachers that followed, so they wanted to split the group in half, but Gustav raised his arm to give a suggestion. 50 students moving with one teacher is still a crowd, so I think dividing the group into a quarter would be better, Gustav said. We only need to get a map of the market, so 2 students who can read maps can lead the other 2 groups. We can decide on where to meet after an hour has gone by, he said, concluded his explanation with this. The teachers felt it made sense and agreed to his suggestion. They wanted him to be one of the leaders, but Gustav turned it down. His reason for suggesting something like this in the first place was he wanted to get the chance to disengage from the group and wander on his own around the market. Chapter 94. After the teacher agreed to Gustav's suggestion, a female student from Sherrill High and a male from Echelon Academy were picked to lead the other 2 teams. They were given a digital map of the market in form of a bracelet. The 4 groups separated into 4 different directions after that. Gustav was placed in the group with the female lead. Gustav followed them as they walked towards the southwest of the ancient market. They had decided that in 1 hour they would be meeting back here. The streets within the market were pretty much crowded, since people came here a lot. Maltida just happened to be placed in the same group with Gustav, and, as expected, she didn't stop pestering him. "You're not going to get anything?" she asked while walking beside Gustav. "Nothing has caught my attention yet," Gustav replied while looking around. He had been ignoring her statements and questions since, but he decided to reply to her this time, since they happened to be in the same group. He couldn't get rid of her any time soon. "Everywhere is full of items I've never seen before," Maltida said with a look of astonishment as her eyes traveled from store to store. Dash. "I like that black box. I want to get it." Dash. "You mean the radio, sir?" Dash. "Oh, is that what it's called?" "Yes, it was used in the past to communicate messages to the masses." Dash. "How much does this gourd cost?" Dash. "That's not a gourd, mister, it's a calabash. It was used by an ancient continent known as Africa to fetch water and keep palm wines." Dash. "Well, that's nice. It will be a great addition to my antique collection. How much does it cost then?" Dash. "What is this statue thingy?" Dash. "It's an ancient craft of Greek gods made using clay and other traditional materials." Customers interested in different kinds of antiques conversed with the store owners and bought what they desired. The students would occasionally separate to buy things from stores around before converging towards one point to continue their journey. Maltida noticed a stall ahead where some traditional outfits could be seen. They had traditional patterns that were not used in this age. "I want to check that place." She pointed at the store while turning towards the side to stare at Gustav. She noticed that he was no longer beside her. She paused her movement and turned to look around her. Gustav was nowhere to be found in the surroundings. How did he leave my side without me noticing? At this time, Gustav was already on the other side of the street. He had made use of silent advancement and dashed to leave the group without any of them noticing. Another thing that made it easier was he wasn't putting on a school uniform like the rest, so he could easily blend into the crowd. Due to the accident that took place in the spacecraft, he was now clad in a blue hoodie and black pant trouser. He didn't have to use shapeshift to disappear from their midst without their knowledge, even though he could use it however he liked at the moment. Maintaining shapeshifting took up a lot of energy points, and Gustav had a lot of that at the moment, but he also knew that it would be stupid to shapeshift in an open place. Swish! Gustav dashed across the street with speed, checking out different stores in the process. After a few more seconds, he came to stop in front of a particular stall. I might be needing one of these in the future, Gustav said internally as he walked towards the counter. "Welcome, young lad," the owner greeted. The owner of the stall was an old man with white beards. "Which of them are you interested in?" the old man asked. Gustav looked around, checking the merchandise one after the other. This was a mask stall. There were different kinds of colorful plastic and wooden masks displayed. Some of them were placed on stands positioned on the right and left sides of the store. Gustav was already interested in a few that he noticed, but he was still finding a hard time picking one. "Young lad, If you're having a hard time deciding, you can tell me the ones that caught your attention. I'll be sure to give you a slightly descriptive tale on the symbolism of each mask," the old man said with a smile. Gustav felt his expression must have made it obvious to the old man that he was having a hard time deciding. Gustav moved to the right stand and stretched out his arm to pick up 2 masks. He placed them in the counter-like table in front, then walked towards the left stand to pick up another mask before performing the same action. 3 masks were placed on the counter-like table at this point. Gustav stared at the old man, waiting for him to speak. The old man stared at the 3 masks for a few seconds with a profound smile on his face. "Young lad, you really have good eyes," the old man complimented while reaching out to pick up the first mask. "Let me start with this." He held up the mask. The mask was shaped to look like a demon with 2 long horns at the top. The red color made it look even more menacing. This is an ancient mask that symbolizes spirituality and protects against demonic beings and monsters. Also, in the past, people that wore these kinds of masks were said to fight against these kinds of monsters to protect people, the old man explained. Gustav stared at the menacing-looking mask with a contemplative look. So people that wore these in the past were some kind of saviors. This was Gustav's thought process. The old man dropped the first mask and picked up the second. The second mask looked like the face of a whitish gorilla. This is also an ancient type of mask that symbolizes strength, brutality, and viciousness. Warlords back in the days wore these kinds of masks since they were the bloodthirsty kind that killed others without a shred of mercy. The old man said and proceeded to put down the second mask. Gustav still had a look of contemplation. He hadn't made his choice yet. The old man picked up the third mask, which also happened to be the most beautiful out of the 3. The third mask was shaped to look like the face of a white and red fox. It was mostly white, but there were parts of it that had reddish designs. Most of the reddish designs were rhombus-shaped. Chapter 95. This particular one, as you can see, looks like a fox, so it symbolizes more than one thing. They're very simple to understand, but also contradictory. The old man paused for a brief moment before continuing. Back then, it was said that this mask symbolizes spiritual blessings which are received from paying tributes to gods and other supernatural creatures. Whenever people wore it back then, it would be to worship their gods before offering a sacrifice. The second symbolism is a simple one. Just as the name implies, it's a fox. People that also wore this type of mask were the ones who were crafty and deceitful. They could be the type that is both vicious and heroic should they choose to. Their ability to fool others is said to be the highest. The old man finished explaining and dropped the third mask too. "Which of the 3 has caught your interest, young lad?" he asked again. Gustav had a look of contemplation on his face. He stared at the 3 masks with his eyes moving from one mask to the other while contemplating their ancient symbolism. "I'll go for this one." After some time, Gustav pointed at the third mask. The old man smiled in return and packaged the mask for Gustav before calling out the price. It was only 150 rad, so Gustav was able to easily purchase it. The old man waved at Gustav as he left the shop and mixed into the crowd. After a few minutes had gone by, he was surprised to see Gustav approaching the shop again. "Did you forget something, young lad?" he asked with a concerned look. "No, I didn't forget anything," Gustav answered the old man, wondering why he would come back in the first place. "I want to purchase the other 2 masks," Gustav said. When it was close to evening time, the students finally returned to the hotel. Today had been pretty adventurous for them. Gustav also returned with the students. In the ancient market, Gustav was able to easily meet up back with the rest of the students because he memorized all the routes, twists, and turns he took when leaving them earlier. He got back to their meeting point without using a map after the time was up. On his way back, he bumped into Angie in the ancient market. At first, he was surprised to see her and wondered why she would be there alone instead of being with her group. Upon listening to her explanation, Gustav had the urge to facepalm. Angie was disconnected from the herd of students because she noticed a kid who was lost within the sea of people inside the market. She decided to help that kid find their parent, and after doing that, she was unable to locate her group anymore. The group was also trying to locate her, but was unable to. The ancient market was a really big place, so it was very easy for people to miss each other. After bringing her back with him, the teachers contacted the other group and informed them about Angie being found. On arriving back at the hotel, Gustav was walking towards his room when he heard someone call out to him, "Gustav, please wait." Gustav paused his steps and turned around. He already recognized the voice. "Principal Erwin," he said with a low tone. Principal Erwin was headed towards him from the entrance, and he was able to call out to Gustav before he got to the elevator. "What can I do for you, Principal Erwin?" Gustav asked. "Gustav, the Exchange of Knowledge event is tomorrow. Please lead the group that will be representing Echelon Academy," Principal Erwin begged. "Not this again," Gustav sighed internally. "I'm not interested, Principal. Find someone else. There are lots of candidates for you to choose from. Please don't bother me again," Gustav said with a look of disinterest and turned around. "By Principal Erwin," he said and proceeded to enter the elevator. He didn't wait for Principal Erwin to try and convince him, because no matter what he had decided not to help Echelon Academy in any way. Principal Erwin glanced at the elevator that had closed up with a provoked look. "Looks like I have to call her. I'm sure he will listen to her," Principal Erwin muttered. Just like that, the night had gone by, and the next morning had come. The students were currently headed for Atrahia City High School. Today was when the exchange event would truly start, and tomorrow was when it would end. They had used the entirety of yesterday to visit important places in the city. The only place they weren't able to visit that was also known as one of the most important parts of the city was the spacecraft stationed in the middle of the skies above the city. Yesterday, they were told that this was where the MBO branch was located within the city, and it was off-limits to non-MBO personnel. Even citizens of the city couldn't visit the place. Gustav felt that the only difference between this one and the one in Plankton City was one was located on the ground while the other was in the skies. Just like Atrahia City, the MBO branch in Plankton City was also off-limits to non-MBO personnel. They arrived at Atrahia City High School after some minutes of traveling on the road. Atrahia City High School happened to be located in a highland area, so when they got down from the bus and started walking, it felt like they were climbing stairs. With the large size of the school, if a normal human was to walk around, they would easily get tired because it was constantly like climbing the stairs. But it wasn't really a difficult thing for the students, since the physical fitness of mixed bloods are higher than normal. Multitudes of students flocked into the school's hall and took their seats. Surprisingly, when Gustav took his seat, he was accompanied by two beauties. One sat on his left and the other sat on his right. The students around would occasionally turn their heads to stare at him and point fingers. Most of them murmured into their friend's ear, but Gustav could hear the words of those within his perception range. "That's him. He survived the attack of the engine room spacecraft without suffering a single scratch." Whenever Gustav heard this, he would wonder if his explanation yesterday didn't enter into the ears of the students. He had given a perfect cover-up explanation, yet the scene was still trending in the lips of the students. "I welcome you all to Atrahia City High School. The exchange of knowledge will commence in a few minutes." A loud voice reverberated across the hall. Chapter 96. I welcome you all to Atrahia City High School. The exchange of knowledge will commence in a few minutes. A loud voice reverberated across the hall. The students stared at the middle of the hall. The hall was arranged in such a way that the large stage was placed in the middle. Beside it was another podium where transparent seats that looked like simulators were placed. A giant screen was placed above, it hung from the ceiling. The seats on the second podium were arranged in a kind of circular format. The person on the stage introduced Atrahia School to the audience and spoke for a few minutes about how the exchange of knowledge will be held. A participant from a school will ask a question, and the rest of the students would think of an answer. They would answer the question in the most descriptive method possible. If the answer was correct, they would receive 5 points. If no one could answer the question, the participant who posed the question would have to explain it. If that happened, the 5 points would go to them. According to the rules, questions from any subject could be brought up. It was done one turn after the other. 3 participants represented a school, but only one could ask a question until it got to their turn again. It would keep rotating from one school to another. Another rule was the question posed wasn't allowed to surpass high school level difficulty. The screens up there were programmed to display the questions asked by the students, grade their difficulty level, and analyze the explanation of the students. I will now call on the schools and the students representing them. The person on the stage right now was the vice principal of Atrahia City High School. When you hear your name, please come over to the stage and sit on the seats reserved for you. Faruko Adrias, Petra Jenkins, and Brenda Serial from Sherrill High, the vice principal called out. From within the crowd, 3 students in white and purple school uniforms walked towards the stage. 2 of them were females, while one of them was a male. The principal proceeded to call out the next names after the first set of students settled down. Artemy Ankles, Fryer Ezekiel, and Johnson Adrian from Brer Bullet High. 3 students clad in green and blue uniforms moved towards the stage after the vice principal called out. This was how students were being called out for the next 10 minutes. Eagle Wings High, Reflection Academy, Mount Eve High, Salvation Academy, Ascension Academy, Black Rock Schools. Finally, it got to Echelon Academy's turn. Maltida Avens, Draco Turk, and Gustav Oslov from Echelon Academy. The vice principal called out. Gustav had a look of confusion upon hearing his name. Why was my name called? He observed his surroundings and noticed that his classmates had the same look of confusion. Although they knew that Gustav was academically brighter than they were, they hadn't expected that Gustav would be picked by the principal. Maltida already stood up when her name was called, but she paused her steps when she heard Gustav's name and turned around. Let's go together then, she proposed. I'm not going, you can head over, Gustav said while remaining in his sitting position. Angie was seating on Gustav's right all this time. She didn't understand why Gustav would not be interested in representing his school. Gustav, aren't you going to go? She asked with a confused look. Not interested, Gustav answered while staring at the first stage where dignitaries were seated. Principal Irwin was staring at him from there with a nervous expression. Maltida noticed the look of disinterest on Gustav's face and turned around to head towards the stage. Gustav felt a vibration in his sleeves area and pulled a blue-colored button from his sleeves area before placing it on the side of his forehead. Yes, Miss Amy? Gustav spoke with a straight look. Is there a good reason why I should? He spoke again. I get a cut. Fair deal. Besides, he only asked me to participate. Does this interfere with our deal in any way? No. All right then. Gustav ended the call with Miss Amy after 2 minutes. At this time, the students participating from all the schools present today had been called out, completely including Atrahia City's high school. They were wondering why Echelon Academy's 3rd seat was still missing a person. Chatter, chatter, chatter. The hall was noisy due to that. Gustav suddenly stood up from his seating position and started walking towards the front. The noisy crowd quietened, and everyone turned to stare at him. Gustav didn't even mind the looks of everyone. He kept walking towards the 2nd stage with elegance. Everyone figured that he was the one who didn't come out earlier. Gustav climbed onto the stage with an unbothered expression and sat on the 3rd seat reserved for Echelon Academy. Maltida was in the middle while the other male student was sitting on the 1st seat. The 3 seats were placed side by side, and there was a circular glass panel in front of the participants. Now, like I've said earlier, the rotation is based on numbering. The vice principal said again. On the glass panels, different numbers lit up on the surface. Echelon Academy's glass panel had the number 4. This meant that they would be the fourth to ask a question. Let the exchange of knowledge begin, the vice principal said and went back to his seat. 3 faces were displayed on the large screen at this moment. The first school that would be asking a question was Sherrill High School. The girl in the middle proceeded to stand up and speak. Our first discussion will be about the laws of gravitational exploration, she said. If a spacecraft was getting pulled into a level 27 wormhole, what would be the best line of action for the captain? She asked. The screen above projected the question and the difficulty level. The difficulty level wasn't above the high school level. A red glowing button appeared on every school's panel. The first school to tap on the panel would be allowed to answer first. TCH, is this even a question? Gustav snickered internally, but he didn't take any action. Beep. The first school to tap on it was Briar Bullet High. They were fast enough to tap on the red display before others. A male student stood and started answering the question. The strength of a level 27 wormhole can be calculated based on the size and the traction force it emits. The pilot could choose to do a split-second analysis and gauge if the amount of attraction force can. The male student kept speaking for several minutes before concluding. The force of acceleration upon using that amount of speed drawn from the emergency tanks would free it from the clutches of the wormhole after performing the previously mentioned procedures. After he finished speaking, the screen analyzed his answer for a few seconds before the result was displayed on the screen. On the screen, big green letters that said correct were displayed, and a table appeared where 5 marks were placed in front of Briar Bullet schools. The audience applauded, and the student sat down with a smile on his face. The next school that was meant in line was Eagle Wings High. A female student stood from their midst and mentioned a topic based on mechanics before poising her questions. The question and answer session continued for several minutes before it got to Echelon Academy's turn. During the previous 4 turns, Echelon Academy was unable to answer a single question, and Gustav had not even tried to touch the red display button since the start. Now that it was Echelon Academy's turn to ask a question, Draco quickly stood up with vigor and poised a question. A particle is moving around in a circle, and its position is given in polar coordinates as x equals cos and y equals rsin, whereas the radius of the circle and theta is in radians. From these equations, derive the equation for centripetal acceleration. After he finished poising the question, he stood with a smug look on his face. Pin drop silence. The students stared at Draco like he was retarded. A regular physics question. Someone from the audience voiced with a look of ridicule. Even the students on the stage had expected something a lot more technical, but they were disappointed. Is this what Echelon Academy has to offer? This was the thought on most of their minds. Gustav was already laughing internally when Draco asked this question. Immediately after the question was asked, he had already solved it in a second internally. He wondered why the principal would choose such a bum. One of the students from Atrahea City High School tapped the red button and stood up to answer the question. Without loss of generality, we only need to look at the equation for the exposition, since we know that centripetal acceleration points towards the center of the circle. Thus, when theta equals 0, the second derivative of x. The student kept explaining until the screen above showed that he had successfully answered the question. Draco sat down with a look of shame. Principal Oywin had the urge to face-bomb from his sitting position. He was already starting to feel frustrated after noticing that Gustav just sat there with an unbothered expression. He didn't look like he was concerned with what was going or like he had intentions of participating. This kid, why isn't he trying to answer any question? Principal Oywin questioned internally with a dark look while staring at Gustav. Chapter 97. Gustav just sat with a look of disinterest as the event carried on. The next school, participants went on to ask their questions. Atrahia City High had the number 12 on their panel, so they were the last school in line for asking questions. When it finally got to their turn, a slim-looking, white-haired male stood up and stated that his question was going to be based on spacecraft before posing a question. The Slarkov spacecraft that landed about 2,000 years ago functioned with what type of engine? He asked while pushing his glasses up. Silence. The students stared in confusion after hearing that question. It was a question based on old technology, which no one paid much attention to these days. The question was displayed on the large screen, and according to evaluation, it wasn't above high school level difficulty. After a few seconds of silence, one of the schools tapped the answer button and stood up. A hyperthalamic, endrophobic, mad get series said to. Before he could answer completely, a loud beep resounded in the environment. This was a sign that the answer was wrong. The student sat down with a crestfallen look after hearing that. After a few seconds, Salvation Academy tapped the answer display button. One of their female students stood up to answer, only for her to also miss it. After this, another school tried answering the question, which led to the same outcome. They were all getting it wrong. This happened 7 times in a row. About 7 schools had tried answering in 10 minutes, but ended up missing the question. 5 more minutes had passed, and not a single school tapped the answer display button during that time frame. The male student had a small grin on his face and pushed his glasses up again, causing a kind of profound reflection of light to bounce off the frame. The students had looks of contemplation as they thought hard about the answer. Gustav stared at the students around like they were clowns. A few minutes ago, they all had looks of haughtiness on their faces like they had knowledge on everything that existed in the universe, but now their pride had been shattered by a question he considered to be simple. Hey, Gustav, why aren't you trying to answer any question? Maltida asked Gustav, who was slouching on his seat with his legs crossed. Why should I? Gustav replied with an unbothered expression. Because you're here and not in the audience. Draco replied from the first seat before Maltida could. He was starting to get pissed at Gustav's nonchalancy towards the event. I didn't ask to be here. Gustav leaned his jaw on his fist as he slouched even more. You. Draco pointed at Gustav with a look of anger. The other students on the stage were wondering why they would be arguing instead of thinking of an answer to the question. You know the answer to the question, right? Maltida asked while staring at Gustav. I guess we'll never know, Gustav answered with a slight yawn. Draco was incensed upon hearing that. You little piece of shit. Do you really not plan on answering any questions all through? Draco said with a look of anguish. He could understand why the principal would decide to pick Gustav. No student in Class 3 could say they had more knowledge than Gustav on topics like science, history, and the likes. This was also one of the reasons why he was bullied. Although he was seen as trash due to his bloodline, he still had academic intelligence which outstripped that of every student in Class 3. Some of the students that bullied him were jealous about the fact that trash was better than them at something. They just couldn't stand it that the so-called trash could do something that they couldn't. Gustav didn't bother answering Draco. His look of disinterest was answer enough as it is. Maltida also noticed that with this Gustav's new attitude, there was nothing they could do to convince him. The other students on the stage stared at Echelon Academy's team with a look of pity. They just had to bring a liability along. This was the thoughts in their minds. When the 5 minutes mark hit, a beep resounded in the hall, meaning all of the students had failed to answer the question, so the student who posed the question would have to answer it. The male student with the glasses moved to the middle of the stage with a smug smile and started explaining the type of engines used by the Slarkovs for their spacecraft in the old days. The engine of the old age Slarkov spacecraft was constructed from a mixture of 3 fundamental properties, which uses a midden crystal as fuel. The explanation went on for about 10 minutes. While the student was voicing out the explanation outwardly, Gustav was answering inwardly. After the student was done with the explanation, the screen lit up with a purple mark, which meant the explanation was graded excellent. All this time the others had only been getting green ticks when they answered a question, but his answer to the question happened to be better explained. Cheer, cheer, cheer. Dash, as expected of Holland. Dash, such brilliant explanation from Holland. Dash, he's the most knowledgeable here. After all, the students from other schools won't be able to hold a candle to him. From the side of the hall where Atrahia City High School students were positioned, cheers could be heard. Some of them praised the student who had just finished explaining. This same student had managed to answer 7 questions out of 19 prior to this. He looked like the typical wimp with his glasses and tiny build, which was why he wasn't noticed at the start. The other students practically didn't notice his presence until he started answering questions correctly and managed to score 35 points for Atrahia City High School. Now they were feeling intimidated and saw him as a great opponent. Holland went back to his seat after explaining, and the event continued. It was Cheryl High School's turn again. Chapter 98. A male student stood up this time to ask the next question. To his disappointment, his question was quickly answered by Holland again. As the event went on, other schools were getting more and more intimidated by Holland's intelligence and knowledge. Out of 7 questions, he had already answered 3 during this time. Echelon Academy was finally able to get up to 15 points after Maltida answered another question. She had given the correct answers to 2 questions in total, while Draco had only answered on correctly. As for Gustav, he only watched the entire scenario. Principal Irwin was already sweating in his seat as he watched the event play out. An hour went by, and every school had taken turns 2 times. On the ranking board, Atrahia City High School was in the lead. 1. Atrahia City High School, 90 points 2. Cheryl High School, 30 points 3. Briar Bullet High Schools, 30 points 4. Black Rock Schools, 25 points 5. Eagle Wings School, 25.6. Ascension Academy, 20.7. Echelon Academy, 20.8. Salvation Academy, 10.9. Mount Eve High, 5.10. Caldruis Eva High, 5.11. Reflection Academy, 5.12. Rose High School, 5 points. A loud beep resounded in the hall after Atrahia City High School finished explaining the question they had just asked. The principal of Atrahia City High School walked to the podium and announced a timeout. The first half of today's exchange of knowledge has come to an end. There will be a 1-hour break for students to go get a breath of fresh air. The principal had a smile on his face as he spoke. You're free to move around the environs. There will be no form of restriction. Enjoy your stay. The principal left the podium after concluding with this. Chatter, chatter, chatter. The students started leaving the hall in groups. Talks about the first half of the event escaped their lips as they walked out. Everyone was still astonished about how Atrahia City High School dominated the top spot on the ranking, and it was mostly thanks to Holland. Holland had answered questions so well that the screen above mostly glowed purple, which signaled that his explanation was excellent. The other competitors could also come up with questions that no one would be able to answer, but they had to consider the difficulty level. If it was above the high school level, it will be automatically cancelled. Also, if they decided to ask a question that would be extremely difficult to answer, and everyone got it wrong, they would have to give and explain the answer to that question. The thought of asking questions that they didn't know the answer to died down because of that. No one was willing to embarrass themselves by asking a difficult question that no one would be able to answer and end up being unable to answer it also. The students mostly talked about how Holland was amazing. Echelon Academy students were cursing Gustav internally and externally. They wondered why he didn't answer a single question throughout the first half. Gustav didn't even mind the stares of his classmates. He put his hands in his pockets and walked out of the hall. It wasn't like this was the first time he was receiving such stares. When he was hailed as trash with a low-grade bloodline, he received such stares. Now that he was living up to their expectations of truly being trash, they still stared at him like that. Gustav. When he got out of the hall, he heard a voice call out his name. He immediately recognized it to be Principal Erwin's voice. Gustav turned around to see Principal Erwin and some of his school teachers also coming out of the hall. The other students headed out gave Gustav a glance before continuing on their travels. They remembered that he didn't answer a single question while being up there and wondered why the school would pick such a useless person. "Come with us, please," Principal Erwin politely requested. Gustav raised an eyebrow with a look of suspicion before walking towards them. They headed towards a particular part of the hall and sat on some of the chairs there. "Why didn't you answer any questions, Gustav?" Principal Erwin asked immediately after they took their seats. "Why should I?" Gustav answered with a question of his own while shrugging. "Principal, vice principal, teachers." They were rendered speechless by his nonchalant answer. "Is something the matter?" Gustav asked with a look of confusion after seeing their looks. "Gustav, you know this is an event and you're participating, so you should know that you're meant to support," Principal Erwin said with a look of frustration. "You asked me to participate, which I did. I don't remember you mentioning anything about answering questions. Being on that stage already means I'm participating," Gustav replied. "What?" The principal and the teachers voiced out in surprise. You must be joking. You should know that." Before Principal Erwin could complete his statement, Gustav interrupted him. "You already made the deal with her, didn't you?" he said, while staring at the principal. "Did you mention the part where I had to answer questions?" The principal's eyes widened slightly in realization. "You only mentioned that you needed me to participate, and I am doing that. I don't have to answer any questions for that." Gustav smiled with a mischievous look and stood up. The principal's face squeezed up as he stared at Gustav leaving. His face looked like it had aged a few more years. The reputation of Echelon Academy School would take a huge dip if the exchange of knowledge ended this way, which could result in him getting fired. The school had always been lax when it came to the affairs of mixed bloods in the school, which was why falling grades of subjects like mathematics and English didn't affect them. This was practically why all of them didn't bother studying these subjects enough. The ones who did were Slarkovs and human students who he didn't bring along for this exchange event. It was impossible to ask for those students to be brought here right now, which was why they could only ask from Gustav. "Wait," Principal Erwin called out to Gustav again. Chapter 99. Gustav paused in his tracks and turned around to stare at Principal Erwin. "Why are you doing this? Echelon Academy is also your school. Do you wish for it to go under?" Principal Erwin asked with a conflicted stare. "Haha, that's the funniest question I've ever heard." Principal Erwin must be a comedian. "Do you really think I care about this school?" Gustav laughed lightly while asking. "The school can be burned down for all I care. It shouldn't be new to everyone that he hated the school after everything they had put him through." Yet Principal Erwin was asking like he wasn't aware of any of that. "Please, Gustav, you can't let the reputation of the school sink," one of the teachers begged. The other teachers also had a pleading look on their faces. "The school will be grateful," the vice principal added. Gustav chuckled and turned around. "I don't care if you all lose your jobs. After all, you never did a thing when I was being bullied by your beloved students." He started walking away once again. Hidden quest completed. A new random quest has been issued. Gustav paused after walking several feet away after seeing the notifications. Completing a hidden quest and receiving a random quest at the same time. Gustav checked out the information under both notifications, and a grin appeared on his face. Had a feeling it would be something like this. Gustav turned around and started heading back towards the principal and the teachers. Their moppy looks changed into hopeful ones after seeing Gustav approaching them. Principal Irwin remember making a deal with Miss Amy? Gustav asked. Principal Irwin nodded, slightly with a knowing look. Good now. You're going to have a separate deal with me if you truly want me to participate, Gustav said, and proceeded to sit while crossing his leg. The principal had the rest of the staff had looks of confusion upon hearing that. Not just you, but all the rest of the teacher too. All of you are involved. Gustav smiled while speaking. Just like that 1 hour had gone by again, and it was time for the exchange of knowledge to resume. The hall was crowded once again. The participants from each school walked towards the stage again, Gustav included. After his discussion with the teachers ended earlier, he walked around the school and visited a few places in the environment. One of them was their library. He was fond of Atrahia's high school library for a few reasons. One of them was there weren't any restricted sessions in the libraries, unlike Echelon Academy. One thing he noticed during that short period of observation was their library mostly had historical information about their city, but when it came to historical information about the world as a whole, Echelon Academy had more detailed books. Cheers! 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 The crowd was still cheering for Atrahia City High School participants. They got to the stage and took their seats. Gustav also took his seat in his initial sitting position. The principal of Atrahia City High walked towards the stage once again and said a few words before giving them the go-ahead for the resumption of the event. As expected, the first school that would be asking a question again was Cheryl High. From now on, leave it to me, Gustav said with a confident expression while staring at Maltida and Draco. Both of them stared back at him with a confused expression. They were about to ask what he meant when the female student from Cheryl started voicing out her question. Cancer used to be a very dangerous disease to humans back in the old days. Explain how they came into existence and how they were cured. The female student stated and took her seat when she was done. She had a pretty confident look on her face. It was obvious that she had used that 1 hour to prepare herself. They waited for about 3 seconds before the screen above lit up with a green mark that symbolized the question wasn't above high school level difficulty. Beep. Immediately the green light appeared. A student had tapped the red light on the panel in front of them. Everyone felt it must have been the genius Holland again, since this was the fastest speed anyone used in tapping the red display button for answering questions. To everyone's surprise, the screen displayed Gustav's appearance and his name. Dash! Isn't he the same guy that didn't bother trying to answer a single question during the first half? Dash! I can tell that his answer is going to be full of rubbish. The crowd of students didn't believe that someone who didn't answer a single question earlier would be able to answer any right now. Only the students of Echelon Academy actually had looks of bewilderment. Is finally going to be serious? Matilda wondered while staring at Gustav, who was now in a standing position. Gustav walked to the middle of the stage and stared at the crowd with a nonchalant expression before he started speaking. Cancer didn't need to come into existence. It was already in humans since the day of their birth. The reason why it went unnoticed was because it was always asleep. Practically dead until a force triggered it. Gustav paused for a while before continuing. Once it was triggered by this force, that is when it awakens in the human body and became discoverable through scientific experiments. Different kinds of things can trigger cancer, it just varies from person to person. It may be an intense workout, frequent usage of dirty outfits, unknown consumption of chemicals, and so many others. Gustav was practically like a teacher, as he explained. He moved to the front of Cheryl High students and placed his left arm in his pocket before continuing his explanation. The cancer cure wasn't later needed since humans achieved partial evolution, causing their internal body structure to slightly change. This caused cancer to totally disappear from the human race in the year 2059. No cure was created in the first place since humans didn't have the capacity to pull that off. Their salvation came from the partial evolution. Gustav concluded with this. Chapter 100. The students of Cheryl High had their eyes slightly widened. How does he know about this? They thought that no one would be able to answer this question since it had to do with both history and biology. The only person that they felt wary about was Holland, and they believed that even he wouldn't be able to answer such a question related to biology dated back by that long. Beep! Another loud beeping reverberated across the hall. Dash, you got it wrong. Dash, as expected of someone who didn't answer a single question in the first half, the beeping sounded like Gustav got the question wrong, but immediately they noticed that was on the screen their eyes widened. Dash, perfect graded explanation. On the screen, Gustav's answer to the question was graded as perfect. Chatter, chatter, chatter. Dash, how is this possible? Dash, he explained the answer perfectly. The students were in shock, except for the Echelon Academy students. The students of Cheryl High School didn't doubt the perfect graded answer, since their explanation wasn't as detailed as that. They knew that if everyone failed to get the right answer and they gave the answer themselves, it wouldn't have been as explanatory as that. Gustav had taken his seat at this point. It was time for the next school to ask their question. Gustav had already grabbed everyone's attention, so they all watched with looks of interest. They wanted to know if what he pulled off earlier was just dumb luck. The next school, which was Eagle Wings High, took the stage. One of their female participants with dark gold hair stood in the middle of the stage and voiced out her question. My question will be based on the anatomy of mixed breeds, the female student said before proceeding to ask her question. Mixed breeds also have bloodlines, yet they're in form of beasts. What differences are there between a mixed breed bloodline and a mixed blood bloodline? After asking the question, the screen graded it to be okay for answering. Beep. Immediately after it was graded, finished, the answer display button had been tapped again. According to the display screen up, 2 students' fingers could be seen on the display panel in front of them. They were Holland and Gustav. They tapped before any one of the students could. They had tapped so fast that no one knew who tapped first. Everyone stared intensely at the stage, waiting for the screen to display who touched the answer button first. Dash, Holland definitely tapped it first. Dash, haha, there's no way he tapped before Holland. Everyone believed Holland tapped before Gustav. All of a sudden, Gustav stood up and walked to the middle of the stage. The students of Atrahea City High School were surprised to see Gustav stand up. Dash, what's he doing? Dash, the person who tapped it first hasn't been displayed. Why is he walking up to the stage? Dash, what a cocky dumbass, I'm sure Holland will be displayed as the first person to. Everyone stared at the screen in surprise, which displayed that Gustav was the first to tap the answer button. They were speechless at the current development. There are several differences between the bloodline of mixed breeds and mixed bloods. Gustav started explaining as he placed his left hand in his pocket and used his right hand to demonstrate. One of them is the fact that mixed bloods mostly have bloodlines that enables them to retain their human form and also at times give abilities that don't require transformation, while mixed breeds have bloodlines that tend to relate with their forms and grants abilities that are generally different from most mixed bloods. Gustav paused for a second and walked to the front of Eagle Wings High School participants. He stared into the eyes of the female who asked the question before he continued speaking. The girl couldn't understand why she couldn't take her eyes off Gustav. Practically every girl in the hall was staring at Gustav with a gaze filled with interest. The way he walked around while giving explanations with his cool expression and good-looking face, mixed with graceful movements, made them feel a certain kind of subconscious attraction to him. Reasons for this is based on how mixed bloods have unsaturated bloodlines within their bodies and have to channel their bloodlines for increment. The mixed breeds have a saturated amount of bloodline within their bodies from the moment of their birth. Gustav kept explaining for another 5 minutes before concluding. He had made extensive research on mixed breeds since he started killing them, which was why he was able to give so much information at the moment. One of the things that bugged him when researching this was if mixed bloods managed to increase the concentration of the bloodlines in their bodies to the point where every vessel, vein, and artery had their bloodline flowing through it, would transformation take place like the mixed breeds? Would mixed bloods transform to become beasts and be unable to go back to their initial state? The reason why this bugged him so much was mixed breeds didn't have normal blood flowing through their body, unlike mixed bloods who had human and Slarkov's blood flowing through them simultaneously. After Gustav finished his explanation, the entire hall became silent again. The screen displayed a perfect explanation, and another 5 marks were added to Echelon Academy. The shocked looks on the faces of other students and the principals of other schools made Principal Owen's face light up. If he was this knowledgeable in the first place, why didn't he say a thing in the first half? Everyone had similar thoughts. They were in awe due to his performance. Like Holland wasn't enough, now we have to compete with another monster. The other participants stared at Gustav with looks of intimidation. Holland kept staring at Gustav, but Gustav didn't even spare him a glance, almost like he was saying, "You're not on my level." The event continued after that, and the next school came up to present their question. Beat. Just like before, Gustav had tapped the button before anyone else again, and walked to the stage to answer. The crowd was once again left with shocked faces, as Gustav gave another perfect explanation while answering this question. Echelon Academy was the 4th in line to ask a question, which meant it was their turn now. Draco wanted to stand up, but Gustav held on to his left shoulder from the side. "I said, leave it to me," Gustav muttered and proceeded to stand up before Draco could reply. "I will be asking a question based on historical records of the Slarkov's descent," Gustav said while walking to the middle of the stage. Chapter 101. The participants stared at him with a nervous expression. This was a very vast topic, and information about it was mostly kept under the wraps. They had no idea if the question would be based on general knowledge or not, but everything still depended on the grading of the difficulty of the question. What tool was presented to Earth by the Slarkovs to show that they were a peaceful race? Gustav asked and walked back to his seat. Chatter, chatter, chatter. The hall became noisy again after Gustav asked his question. This was truly something that wasn't known to the general public, because history books relating to the Slarkov's descent were extremely scarce. It was almost like information about that was being covered up. The screen started calculating the difficulty. In a few seconds, it displayed the difficulty, which happened to be a high school level difficulty. Chatter, chatter, chatter. The hall became noisier. At first, the students believed it would be above high school level, but now that it had been displayed that it wasn't, the participants would have no choice but to answer. Small whispers could be heard on the stage as teammates discussed among themselves how they would answer. Even after 2 minutes had passed, not a single participant stood up to answer. It's just as I thought, he is well versed in science than other topics. Gustav stared at Atrahia City's high school participants with a look of contemplation. He had studied the 3 students representing them earlier, Holland, Ezekiel, and Vivi. The 3 were versed in different aspects that complemented one another, but Holland was the only person Gustav felt was more knowledgeable in the aspect he was versed in, which was science. If he were to come up with a scientific question, he was sure that Holland had an 80% chance of answering. Since Holland was the only person he was wary of, he decided to bring up a subject that wasn't related to science. The girl in their group, Vivi, was the only one who was really knowledgeable when it came to history, but Gustav doubted that even she knew the answer to this. Beep. Finally, a school tapped on the button. A female student from Black Rock School came forward to answer. The item wasn't mentioned in the historical records. How are we supposed to know it? She said with a squeezed-up face. Everyone thought she came up to answer. No one expected that she actually came up to complain about the question. "The tool was very well mentioned," Gustav replied to her bluntly. "Do you even know the answer to the question you asked?" She pointed at Gustav with a dark look. "We will find out when you all fail to answer," Gustav replied with an unbothered look. "Aurora Gantz, that stage isn't for arguments, it's for questions and answers. If you know nothing about the answer to the question, please take your seat or you will get disqualified." A loud voice came from the other stage. It was the vice principal of Atraheus City High School. He had to give her a warning, since she was using the stage for the wrong purpose. Aurora walked back to her seat with a look of embarrassment. Now everyone went back to waiting for another student to walk up the stage and answer. 10 seconds went by in silence. Another 30 seconds went by again, and yet no one stood up to answer. After a minute went by, the female student from Atraheus City High School tapped the answer display panel and stood up. She walked to the middle of the stage and started speaking. According to the history of the Slarkovs' descent, the humans thought they were hostile and acted unreasonably by sending out artilleries in an act to protect themselves from doom. The historical records also connote that an item was given to the Earth as a gift to show that they were a peaceful race, but this item wasn't mentioned. She paused for a bit before continuing. From our observation of Earth's history down the line, the Earth seemed to be protected by something relating to a prediction machine. The reason for this thought is because of the time a meteor shower was said to rain on the Earth. The places that were affected had been evacuated of human life beforehand, she said with a look of certainty. I believe the item is a technological doom prediction device. She concluded with this. Chatter, chatter, chatter. Voices conversing could be heard from the crowd. They talked about the possibility of Vivi's answer being correct while waiting for the result. Even the audience themselves were not very knowledgeable when it came to history, so they couldn't tell if the answer was correct. Beep. The screen finally displayed the status of her answer after a few seconds. To everyone's surprise, she was wrong. Here I was thinking she could actually answer correctly with the way she started. What a disappointment, Gustav said internally. The chatters from the crowd increased again. Since even Vivi got it wrong, I doubt any of the students can get it correctly. I doubt that this Gustav who asked the question can answer it. The crowd, especially Atraheus City High School students, had already seen Vivi as a goddess of history due to the way she had been answering questions related to them previously. Now that she failed to answer, they believed that no one else could. The participants that had similar answers to Vivi's answer remained in position with a dumbfounded look. They couldn't think of anything else that would be the right answer to this question. Beep. Another beep resounded in the hall. This signified that the timer for answering the question had finished counting down. Now the person who posed the question would have to answer it, since the other participants failed to do so. Gustav, knowing he was up, walked to the stage. I asked that what tool was presented to humanity by the Slarkovs. It's a very simple question. Gustav started speaking. In the past, when the Slarkovs descended, there was chaos, but the Slarkovs gave two things to humanity to prove that they weren't a hostile race. Instead, they were peaceful. Gustav paused for a bit before continuing. One is well known to everyone, while the other is hidden. Intelligence, Gustav stated with a profound look. Chatter, chatter, chatter. How could intelligence be the answer? Is he messing around right now, or he doesn't know the answer? Is he referring to intelligence as the tool received? The crowd refused to believe that Gustav was right. Gustav didn't mind their words and kept speaking. Chapter 102. In the historical records of the Slarkovs' descent, it was well noted that the Slarkovs had given a tool to the humans as a gift to show that they weren't hostile, but this tool wasn't revealed. But was that the only tool that the Slarkovs presented the humans with? Of course not. The humans also demanded that the Slarkovs share their knowledge and intelligence on technology with them. If they had decided not to share, the Slarkovs would have been seen as a hostile race, so the Slarkovs also shared their intelligence with the humans. This means 2 tools were given, one is unknown and the other is intelligence. Gustav stopped moving and stood in the middle of the stage. Since I asked what tool was given, and there happened to be 2 tools, you only needed to mention a single one, Gustav added with a slight smile. Beep. The screen lit up, displaying that Gustav had answered the question correctly. Silence. The crowd was once again rendered speechless. Gustav had practically played with their minds. It was public knowledge that technological advancement today was due to the Slarkovs, but when a question like this was asked, the first thing that came to mind would be the item that was presented as a gift to the humans. No one would think of the intelligence that was shared. Even the principals were surprised when they heard this. They hadn't expected such a reply since they knew the information about that item was very well guarded. They thought Gustav was also going to miss the question, including Principal Erwin. This kid, I thought he asked this question so everyone could fail and the 5 points would be lost. Who knew he would pull such a mind twist on everyone? Principal Erwin had a look of surprise. His thought was similar to the rest of the principals. They had not expected Gustav to have an idea about that item. Even if he knew about it, he wouldn't be able to mention it, since it was a crime to reveal the item in public. It was a very well-guarded secret among the higher-ups. Gustav would be taken into custody if he knew about it and decided to reveal it here. Gustav walked back to his seat after causing the crowd feel awed. Angie cheered for Gustav from her seat area. From the start of the event, she had been the only one cheering for him. Her classmates would stare at her with a weird look, wondering which side she rooting for, and why she would even be cheering for someone who didn't answer a single question the whole time. But she wasn't concerned about their stares. Only her close friends in school had heard her speak about Gustav, but they weren't impressed when he didn't answer a single question in the first half. Now they were starting to understand why Angie was so infatuated with him. Gustav walked back to his seat amidst the awe-stricken faces of the crowd. We were fooled. The participants could only blame themselves for not deciphering the question properly. The event commenced, and a participant from the next school came on the stage. When the question was asked again and graded on the screen, the beeping sound was heard immediately. This time, a lot of the students tapped on the answer button at the same time. At least that was how the audience saw it, but the screen showed Gustav as the first person to tap the answer display button once again. Gustav answered the question correctly, adding extra 5 points to Echelon Academy. As the event continued, the participants and audience faces turned from shock to awe and from awe to disbelief. Gustav would always be displayed as the first to tap the answer button. The participants were starting to think that it was rigged, since they also tapped the button immediately after the question had been graded. Atrahia City High School participants would purposely stretch out their finger towards the panel before the question was graded, so they could quickly tap on it, but even with that, Gustav would still be displayed as the first to tap. Due to this, Gustav kept bagging points for Echelon Academy, causing them to rise on the rankings. Gustav kept answering one question after the other correctly. After answering the 17th question, Vivi couldn't take it anymore. She stood up with an incensed look and accused Echelon Academy of cheating. How could he keep being the first to tap when we all tapped it at the same time? She pointed at Gustav as she spoke. This disturbed the event, and the principal of Atrahia City High School had to address this on the podium. Vivi, take your seat and stop throwing baseless accusations around, Atrahia City High School principal said. What? Principal Dirk, it's obvious that he's cheating, Vivi shouted out while staring at Gustav with a look of anguish. Gustav just stared back at her with a calm look. Please take your seat so you do not embarrass yourself any further, Principal Dirk replied, dumbfounded them. They had not expected this to be his response. Principal Dirk, what is the meaning of this? Your student is trying to tarnish the reputation of mine, Principal Erwin voiced out from behind. Your student is cheating, Vivy shouted out. Vivy, keep quiet! Principal Dirk had to scold her openly before she turned silent. He turned around and apologized to Principal Irwin before asking the screen to replay the previous question and answer sessions. On the large screen, footages were displayed of when the previous questions were graded. It displayed the footage in slow motion. All the participants stretching their fingers forward to tap into the answer button, but before any one of them could touch it, Gustav's finger would have already made contact. His finger was like a blur pushing forward with a speed that was faster than the other participants. The students didn't notice this earlier since all the participants were very quick in tapping the button. They had been thinking all the participants made contact at the same time, but now they realized just how wrong they were. Vivy felt a wave of embarrassment envelope her. Vivy apologized to Gustav now, Principal Dirk commanded. Vivy shyly walked towards Echelon Academy sitting position and bowed slightly in front of Gustav. I'm sorry for accusing you wrongly, she apologized. She felt like she had received another slap on her face after failing to answer his question the first time. Gustav replied by nodding at her. After that, she returned to her seat and the event continued. The entire hall was still in awe since they've been proven wrong time and time again by Gustav's feats. This kid, how is he able to move so fast? Even Principal Irwin was in awe. Chapter 103. Every other participant on the stage was all supposed to have better bloodlines than Gustav, so it came off as suspicious to the principal when he noticed that Gustav was surpassing them in speed. Maybe it's because of her, Principal Irwin remembered that Gustav had been receiving training from Miss Amy. It wasn't a secret anymore that Gustav was receiving training from Miss Amy, but no one knew that Gustav's increase in strength didn't totally come from her. Principal Irwin felt that Gustav's training with Miss Amy was the only possible explanation, even though it was supposed to be impossible to train an F-grade mixed blood to be more powerful than those that had higher grades. This was the explanation he came up with, but that didn't mean his suspicion towards Gustav had reduced. Instead, he knew that there was nothing he could do about it. Maybe she only trained him in the aspect of speed. Principal Irwin came to this conclusion since it was very possible for a person to be trained in only speed and end up becoming faster than those that were supposed to be stronger. Principal Irwin had a little monster like this and decided to keep him under the wraps during the first half. Principal Dirk said from the side. Haha, Principal Dirk, that wasn't my intention. He was only meant to observe his opponents for the first half and know how to tackle them successfully during the second half. Principal Irwin didn't miss the opportunity to make Echelon Academy look good. Blowing Gustav's trumpet was the best way to achieve that right now. Ah, so he's like a secret weapon, and Principal Irwin decided not to unleash him till the next half. Black Rock, Principal asked from the side with a look of astonishment. Haha, you can say that. Principal Irwin laughed lightly while replying. A secret weapon that cost me a lot. Principal Irwin was both heartbroken and joyful at the same time. But at least he is worth it. The exchange event commenced, and schools continued to ask their questions only to have them answered by Gustav. Holland stared at Gustav from his position and shook his head with a wry smile. I've lost to him. An hour later the exchange of knowledge event had come to an end, and the results were currently being showcased on the screen above. 1. Echelon Academy, 190 points 2. Atrahia City High School, 90 points 3. Sherrill High School, 35 points 4. Briar Bullet High Schools, 30 points 5. Black Rock Schools, 30.6. Eagle Wings School, 25.7. Ascension Academy, 20.8. Salvation Academy, 10.9. Mount Eve High, 5.10. Caldruis Eva High, 5.11. Reflection Academy, 5.12. Rose High School, 5 points. Echelon Academy took first place in the exchange of knowledge event. The difference in points between the first and the second place was gargantuan. It was truly an outstanding win for Echelon Academy. The entire hall erupted in cheers after the event came to an end. The cheers were mostly from Echelon Academy students. Even though a lot of them still regarded Gustav as a lower life form due to his bloodline, they had to admit that this wouldn't have been possible without him. The exchange of knowledge event came to an end this way, and the students were taken back to the hotel to rest for tomorrow's duel. It had already been announced that there were going to be duels between schools tomorrow in Atrahia City High School's training grounds. All schools would be participating with 7 students each. Some hours later, Gustav was heading to his room after he had a conversation with the principal and some of the teachers. That's more than 1 million now. I just need to find a way to keep multiplying that, Gustav said internally as he walked across the hallway. He had finished receiving compensations from the principal and the teachers. It was truly a bountiful harvest for him. As Gustav traversed through the hallway, he noticed someone headed towards him from the opposite direction. What are you doing here? Gustav asked with a menacing look after figuring out who the person was. It was none other than the white-haired beauty Maltida. She paused her movement when she arrived in front of Gustav. Gustav walked to the front of his room door and stood before it while staring at her. What do you want? Gustav asked again. Well, first, good job today. We would have lost if you didn't step up, she praised Gustav with a smile. What exactly do you want, Maltida? Stop beating around the bush. I know you're not the type to care about others, Gustav said with an intense glare. Ouch, that hurt, Maltida muttered with a wry smile. But maybe you're right, Maltida replied with a serious gaze. When you live the kind of life that I do, you tend to ignore th. Before Maltida could complete her sentence, Gustav interrupted her. I don't care. Keep whatever you're going to say to yourself. Gustav's tone and manner of speaking at this point sounded very uncaring. It was laced with such coldness that Maltida felt chills, especially with the way he stared at her. Just tell me what you want. Why are you on my case? Gustav asked while moving closer to her. I want us to make a deal, Maltida said while moving closer to Gustav. A deal? Sounds pretty interesting, but what makes you think I'd make a deal with you without knowing your motive first? Gustav asked. I want us to work together after getting into the MBO training camp. I want us to be accomplices. Maltida finally spilled the beans. Work together? What makes you think you'll pass the test and get into the camp? Even if I did, why would you want to work with trash? Gustav asked in successions. I hope you stop seeing me as a fool, because you and I both know that you're not trash anymore. Maltida said with a look of certainty. I don't know what happened to you recently, but I can tell that you're not the same as you used to be. She added. I don't know what you're getting at. Why would you need an accomplice within the camp? Gustav asked with a suspicious gaze. You can't understand the information big families receive. If we become comrades, I will explain everything to you. It's going to be a win-win in the end, Maltida answered. Just where are you getting such ideas about me being worthy of becoming your accomplice? Gustav questioned with a suspicious gaze. Chapter 104. You survived the attack of the spacecraft in Site number 47. You left my side without me noticing during our tour in the market, and your personality took a complete 180 degrees turn. Gustav, it's all right if you want to hide the fact you're now different, but please stop treating me like a fool. I've already told you what I want. If we work together, we could really gain a lot of advantages from being each other's companion. Consider my request. Maltida's explanation left Gustav with a contemplative expression. Now that she had revealed her intentions, Gustav's suspicion towards her had reduced. If she didn't come clean, Gustav would never give her any chances. So, you want us to make use of one another? You scratch my back, and I scratch yours, mutual gains, is that it? Gustav said. Matilda nodded slightly. That's why I want to make a deal with you, so you can see just how sincere I am about this, Maltida explained. Let's go talk somewhere. Gustav turned around and headed for a secluded place within the hotel with Maltida. An hour later, Gustav was in his room, seating on his bed. Only 2 of his roommates were in at this moment, so the room was quiet. A lot has happened today, but I still got a lot of rewards from them. Gustav reminisced about today's event. The other time, when he decided not to represent Echelon Academy, he unknowingly completed a hidden quest. Hidden quest completed. Disagree to the requests of your principal. Rewards plus 10,000 EXP. Plus 5 extra attributes points at first. When Gustav saw it, he nearly laughed out loud, wondering why the system would give him such a quest. But just as he was leaving the gathering of the principal and the other teachers, he received another quest. New quest has been issued. Showcase your knowledge in the school event. Gustav sighed internally when he saw this quest. Isn't the system contradicting itself now? This was the thought that came to Gustav's mind when he first saw the quest. After the exchange of knowledge, he got another system notification that the quest had been completed. Gustav had been wanting to check out the reward since, but he didn't get the chance until now. Quest completed. Showcase your knowledge in the school event. Rewards plus 10,000 EXP. Plus 1 all stats. All skills and abilities level up. Genetic transformation bloodline level up. He nodded in satisfaction after seeing this and called for the system interface to open up. Host attributes, skills and abilities, bloodlines, quests, shop. He immediately opened host attributes after the interface appeared in his line of sight. Host attributes. Name, Gustav level, 8 class. EXP, 102, 500/150, 000. HP, 1250/1250 energy. 9892800/1000 attributes. Strength, 41 perception, 41 mental fortitude, 41 agility, 41 speed, 58 bravery, 41 intelligence, 41 charm, 41 defense, 41 attributes points. 40 Gustav noted the increase in his stats and EXP. He decided to add some points to the attributes, except for speed. Add 2 points to strength. Plus 2 points has been added to strength. Add 2 points to perception. Plus 2 points has been added to perception. Add 2 points to mental fortitude. Plus 2 points has been added to mental fortitude. Add 2 points to agility. Plus 2 points has been added to agility. Add 2 points to bravery. Plus 2 points has been added to bravery. Add 2 points to intelligence. Plus 2 points has been added to intelligence. Add 2 points to charm. Plus 2 points has been added to charm. Add 2 points to defense. Plus 2 points has been added to defense. Gustav was still getting his daily tasks done, even inside the hotel. There were workout facilities within the hotel, which made it easy for him to complete his daily task. After Gustav finished distributing the points, he closed host attributes and opened bloodlines. He wanted to check on his bloodline upgrade. Bloodlines, genetic transformation bloodline grade. See abilities tied to bloodline: frowny face shape-shifting, joint movement, size manipulation. Beast transformation bloodline grade. D abilities tied to bloodline: frowny face partial mutated bull transformation, bloodwolf transformation, Savernia serpent transformation, atomic manipulation bloodline grade. D abilities tied to bloodline: frowny face, disintegration of atomic structures, gravitational energy container grade. B abilities tied to bloodline: energy installment energy, discharge, gravitational imbalance, gravitational field charge. Gustav scrutinized the bloodline panel with a smile. 1B grade bloodline, 1C grade bloodline, and 2D grade bloodline. Gustav felt satisfied with his rate of improvement. Even though he hadn't stolen as many bloodlines as he would have wanted to, he was still okay with this amount, and he knew laying low now would be the best line of action. So he had decided to put off trying to steal bloodlines from his classmates for now. He was also satisfied with the bloodline he got from combining those 2 bloodlines, even though he wasn't able to control it fully. The power was truly as dangerous as the system told him. After using energy installment for the first time 2 weeks ago, he ended up absorbing the electrical energy of 7 blocks around him. The streets were out of electricity for the next 2 days due to that. When he was experimenting with it, he noticed that the energy wasn't absorbed into his body. Instead, it was absorbed into a gravitational force that surrounded him. The gravity would collapse the space around him and store the energy there. It would be up to him to decide how and what he wanted to use it for. Gustav continued the experiment in the sparse forest region behind the neighborhood. He decided to try out one of the abilities, and he chose energy discharge. When he activated it, a system notification popped up in his line of sight. How much energy does host wish to discharge? But before he could reply, another notification popped up. All energy accumulated into gravity field will now be discharged. Boom! A vast wave of reddish energy, laced with electric snakes, blasted out of Gustav's body. Bang! 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 Trees within the vicinity were blasted apart as the energy wave incinerated a radius of 300 feet around him. Even the ground was scorched. Gustav couldn't imagine what would have happened if people were moving around here. From then, he had decided that he would only use the ability of this bloodline in cases of emergencies. Chapter 105. Although Gustav had said he wasn't going to make use of the bloodline except in cases of emergencies, there were still times that the bloodline would activate by itself. An example was when he almost absorbed the border during their travels. He suspected earlier that a part of the energy would be absorbed into his body if the gravitational field was filled up, but the system had shown that it would absorb the rest of the energy if the gravitational field was filled up. Gustav would go to the forest area every day to try and train his control of this bloodline, but even with that, he still couldn't grasp control of it properly. He had calculated that the amount of force generated when he made use of discharge after absorbing 2 blocks of light was equivalent to a small nuclear electromagnetic force with wild electric currents within. It packed a lot of compounded destructive force, and he could tell that a Zulu-ranked mixed blood would be instantly blasted apart if he decided to unleash it before them. Right now his gravitational field was filled up again. The energy always surrounded him and couldn't be sensed by anyone else besides him. In other words, Gustav was like a walking bomb right now. I just need to keep things under the wraps. For now, I've been attracting a lot of attention to myself recently, Gustav said internally. But after recalling every event that happened to date, he realized that there were a lot of things that he couldn't have done low-key. Although he could have carried out some of his actions better, he wouldn't have been able to pull some things off if he wasn't under the spotlight. Now that he had a C-grade bloodline, he had fulfilled all the requirements for joining the MBO. The only issue was coming up with a good explanation as to why he was C-grade instead of being below F-grade. Gustav started coming with other plans and drafts in his mind for possible future occurrences. It was already 7 p.m. at this time. Gustav remembered that he was supposed to meet Angie on the 238th floor to play some games. He stood up and walked out of the room. It took him about 5 minutes before he arrived on the floor where a lot of students visited to play arcade games. On entering what greeted Gustav's sight were glittering lights and a crowd of people moving to and fro. The place was as large as an entire outdoor park. Different kinds of gadgets could be seen at different spots. There were spots for playing shooting games, parkour games, virtual reality, casino bets, etc. This floor was always busy because of this. Gustav, a feminine voice called out to him from ahead. It was a girl in a white and green gown with an athletic figure. She had a beautiful and warm face, with silver and pink shoulder-length hair. 2 small horns protruded from her forehead, and light makeup was applied on her face, making her look particularly dazzling. "You came," Angie said as she arrived before Gustav. "Yes, why wouldn't I?" Gustav asked with a confused look while checking her out. "Why is she all dressed up?" Gustav wondered. He was astonished by the way Angie looked so gorgeous with her get-up. He was only wearing some plain trousers and a blue jacket, so he didn't stick out in any way among the crowd of people unlike her. Hi, I thought you would ditch me," Angie said with a smile on her tender face. "Why would I ditch you, Angie?" Gustav asked with a look of confusion as they walked together. "Well, you always avoid me since I'm such a bother, and you never take that look off your face," Angie said with a look of embarrassment. "What look?" Gustav with a confused expression. "Ah, don't mind me. What games are we playing tonight?" She quickly changed the topic. Gustav stared at her from the side with a suspicious look before replying. "Let's go to the spacecraft simulator first." "Ah, I knew you were going to pick that one," Angie said with a smile. "My friends are waiting for us there," she added. "Friends?" Gustav said with a surprised look. "Yes, they wanted to meet you," Angie replied with a gleeful expression. Gustav still felt uncomfortable when the word friend was mentioned, but since it was Angie, he didn't think much of it. They kept walking until they arrived somewhere around the middle of the floor. Around here, there were different screens placed above that showed spacecrafts battling in space. There were several battle rings where people with a helmet over their heads sat onto a chair. They weren't moving, but their brains were working at the moment. This part of the arcade was where VR games were played. "Ariana, Elle," Angie called out to two girls who were currently occupying one circle. Both girls called out at the same time and walked to meet up with Angie ahead. Ariana was brunette with cherry red lips, while Elle has green short hair and matured-looking face. Both of them were good-looking. "Is Lim still at it with that guy?" Angie asked when she arrived in front of them. "Yes, he's proving a bit difficult to defeat." The girls turn around to look at the circle behind and the screen above. The two other people within the circle, currently seated on a pilot-like chair with helmets on their heads. One was a female while the other was a male. They were currently inside the game going against each other with their spacecraft. On the screen above, two large war spacecrafts wheezed across space, shooting laser beams at one another intensely. It was hard for one to hit the other due to the way they moved fluidly. One was pinkish and red, while the other was full black. The former was being piloted by their friend, while the latter was being piloted by the guy. Chapter 106. It was obvious that they were both skilled. The two girls noticed the handsome blonde-hair male behind Angie. "Angie, is that?" Elle voiced out with an astonished look. "Gustav." Ariana shouted out with excitement and walked towards him. She arrived before Gustav and grabbed his right hand with both her hands. She held them up with an excited expression as she spoke. "Gustav, I'm a fan." Gustav was surprised with the way she just grabbed him. Another thing was his hand was currently resting on her perky boobs. Gustav didn't know if this was done on purpose or subconsciously. "Your knowledge on almost everything is second to none among our peers, and I'm still in disbelief even now. I'm also shocked that you're dating our best friend." "Let's all be friends, please," she begged with a smile. Gustav was still short of words, so he didn't hear the part where Ariana mentioned dating their best friend. "Pa, oi, what are you saying?" "You'll scare him away." Elle slapped Ariana's head from behind, causing her to drop Gustav's hand. The feeling of softness and squishiness left his palm after it disengaged from her chest. "Gustav, just ignore her. We're glad you're here," Elle said with a smile. "Hey, come on, why did I have to receive a slap?" Ariana said with a glare and pout. "Because you're creeping him out," Elle glared back at Ariana. Angie's face was already turning red from embarrassment behind them as she stared at Gustav's face occasionally. Her mind wandered to another realm as the redness on her face intensified. It was almost like smoke was going to start erupting from her head soon. What a fun bunch. "They don't seem bad," Gustav said internally while scrutinizing bickering girls. "He doesn't look creeped out to me," Ariana said in her defense. "Well." Elle was about to answer when she was interrupted by Gustav's statement. It's ending, Gustav said while staring at the screen. Ending. Both girls voiced out as they followed Gustav's line of sight. They stared at the screen, also, and noticed that the battle was still going on. She has won, Gustav said with a certain look. The girls stared at the screen with a look of confusion. They couldn't see any signs that their friend was winning, but in the next few seconds, their eyes widened. Two wormholes suddenly appeared out of nowhere while the pinkish spacecraft was being chased by the black. Due to the fact that the wormhole was still gathering power when it just appeared, its pull wasn't powerful enough to hold the pinkish spacecraft in place. This allowed the pinkish spacecraft to speed out of its AoE, but the same couldn't be said for the black spacecraft behind. The black spacecraft was being pulled left and right by the gravitational force of both wormholes, preventing it from moving for a while. The pinkish spacecraft suddenly did a 180 degrees turn and shot out a large, pillar-like laser beam towards the black spacecraft. Troyan! The laser beam pierced through the spacecraft. Boom! The spacecraft exploded into smithereens. Player Lim wins. Haha, Lim won, Ariana voiced out gleefully. Angie was brought out of her imagination after hearing that. Damn it, how could I lose? Let's go again. The guy who had just lost pulled off his helmet and voiced out. Another beautiful face was unveiled when the other girl removed the helmet on her head. It was a slightly tanned, red-haired beauty. Her body shape was already looking attractive before she removed the helmet. Now that she did, it further increased her attractiveness. Once a loser, always a loser. You've lost the chance to have me. Get lost. The girl said with a fierce glare. But I. The boy wanted to retort, but her fierce gaze made him flinch back in fear. She kept staring at him in that manner till he turned around and left. Wow, Lim is at it again, Ariana said with a burst of light laughter. Lim turned around to stare at Ariana, Elle, and Angie. He was bound to lose, and there's no way I'd go out with a loser anyway, Lim said. Oh, is that? She noticed Gustav behind. The girls noticed that she was staring at Gustav and smiled. Yes, he's Gustav, Ariana said with a delighted look. Lim stood up from her seat and walked towards them. Lim reacted with a look of astonishment and turned to stare at Angie. He's cute. Can I have him? Lim said with a smirk. Even Gustav was shocked by the sudden statement. Is this how girls act? He wasn't used to speaking with girls, so he had no idea how he was supposed to respond. Angie shrieked and moved towards the side to stand in between Lim and Gustav. Haha, I'm just kidding, Lim said and stood up. There will probably be another challenger soon, Lim added. It's all your fault after all. Why would you declare such a thing in the first place? Elle said while sighing. Lim issued a challenge recently. Anyone that was able to defeat her in this game would be given the chance to date her. Since then, boys from every school had been coming to challenge her. I declared such because no one can defeat me, Lim said with boldness. Since she issued the challenge, not a single person had been able to win her. The three girls sighed when they heard that. Lim was very prideful after all. Hey, Gustav, I heard that you're good at playing this, Lim said while walking towards Gustav. I'm just a beginner, Gustav replied with a dismissive look. Oh, a beginner. Angie said, you beat quite a lot of students here yesterday. How about we have a go? She proposed while staring into Gustav's eyes. I'm still a beginner compared to you, so you'll only waste time playing with me. I'm assured to lose, Gustav replied to her casually. You won't lose anything from losing, but if you defeat me, you'll get the chance to date me, she said while winking. Hey, Lim, behave, that's Angie's Cruz. Ariana didn't get the chance to complete her words before Elle covered her mouth. All right, let's play. I might need some tips from a pro player after all, Gustav said with a smile. Angie had a worried look on her face after hearing that. Don't worry, he'll lose, Lim said while staring at Angie. Angie pouted her lips in displeasure. Gustav better lose, she said internally. Gustav only smiled and walked towards the chair. He grabbed the helmet and took his seat. Shall we? Gustav said like a gentleman. Yes, we shall, haha. Prepare to lose, but don't worry, I'll take it easy on you. Lim sounded like a sweet villainess with her statement. All right, let's play. Gustav placed the helmet on his head at the same time with Lim. 3 minutes later. Player Gustav wins. These words were displayed on the screen along with blown-up parts of a pinkish spacecraft floating away in space. The three girls watching from behind had their mouths wide open. How did Lim lose that easily? Even Angie was surprised. Chapter 107. Lim's expression of disbelief became visible after she removed her helmet. Gustav pulled off his helmet too. A small grin could be seen on his face. Thanks for going easy on me, Gustav said with a look of appreciation. Cut the bullshit, how did you do that? Lim asked. So vulgar for a young lady, Gustav said with a smile. The girls behind chuckled upon hearing that and seeing Lim swell up due to frustration. It's really very simple. Just study the patterns of the superclusters and Pleiades properly so you know which parts of space are weaker and more likely to collapse due to intensely powerful blasts, Gustav explained with a profound look. 3 minutes ago, when he started playing with her, Gustav didn't try to battle her head-on. When it came to direct battle, he knew he'd probably not be her match since he was still inexperienced when playing the game unlike her, so he decided to lead her around. She knew he was leading her around, but she had no idea why or what reason he would have for shooting at different places in the open space, like he didn't know how to aim properly since none of the shots he fired made contact or came close to making contact with her spacecraft. Also, he used the most powerful shots the spacecraft could offer, which would consume power and feel crazily. Although she was experienced in playing the game, she didn't really have knowledge about space, but Gustav was very knowledgeable when it came to a lot of things, and space was included. The cannons of spacecraft in this age had been built to be very powerful, that it was possible for consecutive blasts to destroy an entire star. There was another thing that those consecutive blasts could do, which was to cause space to collapse against itself and create a black hole. Gustav studied the patterns of space and knew exactly where to fire to easily cause space around a particular part to collapse. Spacecrafts of this age could escape wormholes and black holes, but when they appeared in multiples, they wouldn't be able to escape in one piece, or they might not be able to escape at all. Generally, black holes were more powerful than wormholes, so when 50 black holes appeared around Lim's spacecraft, she didn't know how to proceed. Her spacecraft was caught in between the black holes, while Gustav had navigated his spacecraft away from the AOC. Her spacecraft was torn apart by the multiple black holes, and Gustav won. Your knowledge led to my defeat. Lim couldn't really understand everything about the way Gustav won, but she knew it was attributed to his intelligence and knowledge. Some readers will wonder how that has got to do with intelligence, so I'll explain in the author's note below. I put this here because a lot of you don't read the author's note below and end up missing explanations sometimes. Let's go again, Lim stated with a decisive look. Are you going to offer something else if you lose again? Gustav asked with a smirk. Lim's eyes widened in realization. I lost to you just now, which means... He gets to date me, she said, voiced out. Everyone's eyes widened upon hearing this. DTE. Angie voiced out with a look of indignation. Lim. You. Angie pointed at Lim with a look of speechlessness. Haha. Calm down, I don't have plans of dating you, or anyone else for that matter. I'll just ask for something else instead, Gustav said to clear up the weird atmosphere. Upon hearing that the tension in the atmosphere reduced just as Gustav expected, but Lim couldn't understand why she suddenly felt down when Gustav said he didn't have plans of dating her. Such blatant rejection. When did I lose my charm? She sighed internally. If anyone who knew Lim was to find out that Gustav had rejected her, they would think he was kicked in the head by a donkey. Lim was well known to be the #1 beauty who came from a family that owned a fashion company. She only attended Black Rock School because it was owned by her great-maternal grandmother. Every guy wanted to date her, and Gustav just threw that chance away. Let's go again. If I win, your previous win will be cancelled, Lim said with a look of unwillingness. What happens if you lose? Gustav asked. Well, if I lose, you can make a request, and I will grant it, Lim stated with a fierce look. However, she still added, but I won't lose. All right then, let's have another round, Gustav chuckled softly after replying. 3 minutes later, player Gustav wins. This was displayed on the large screen above. Lim grounded her teeth in frustration after removing the helmet. Let's go again, she voiced out. 2 minutes later, player Gustav wins. Once again, Gustav won, and Lim demanded a rematch. This went on till after they had rematched more than 10 times. The girls noticed that whenever Gustav defeated her, he would spend a shorter time to defeat her the next time they had a rematch. The next time would always be shorter than the last, and he defeated her within 30 seconds in their last rematch. They had lost count of how many times they opened their mouths in disbelief. Lim, who couldn't be defeated by any of their peers, was getting trashed by Gustav quite easily. After losing, once again, Lim finally lost any hope of defeating Gustav. She noticed that with every round, Gustav would get better and better. It was as if he was using their battles to improve even further. Her thought was correct. Gustav was using their battles to improve himself on aerial warfare. Although the kind of spacecrafts they were using to battle in the VR was a smaller version of an original spacecraft and only needed a single person to pilot it, there were still a lot of similarities between both. Learning how to pilot a spacecraft within this VR was very possible, most especially because of the fact that it fully immersed the players into the game like they were in an original spacecraft. Lim, do you want to go again? Gustav asked after removing his helmet. Lim stared at him for a few seconds before turning to look in another direction. What's the point? You've broken my confidence. She sighed with a look of defeat. Chapter 108. I don't mind being yours now, since you've totally dominated me, Lim said with her face becoming red. Lim, what are you saying? Angie said, while staring at Lim. He defeated me severally, Angie. He has gained the right to not only go on a date with me, but have me, Lim said with her face turning red. How can you just decide to let him have you like that? Angie pointed at Lim with a wolf-like, fierce face as she spoke. It was a challenge, and he won. He deserves his reward, Lim replied. No, he definitely doesn't want a reward, Angie said with an unwilling look. Ariana and Elle watched from the side with a look of confusion, wondering how things suddenly became heated. I do want a reward, Gustav finally spoke. Every one of them turned to stare at Gustav after hearing that. A reward? Then you want her? Angie asked with a crestfallen look. Don't misunderstand. I mentioned earlier that I would ask for something else, Gustav said. Angie sighed in relief after hearing that, but she still wanted to know what Gustav wanted. You lost to me 15 times, so you'll have to grant 15 of my requests, Gustav announced. 15. The girls were surprised, but what they heard next surprised them even more. I accept, Lim stated. She accepted just like that? They expected her to still show unwillingness or make sure Gustav reduced the number of requests. But to their surprise, she accepted just like that. But don't go overboard with your requests, Lim added. Gustav stared at her for a brief, while before replying, Overboard, eh? I guess we shall see. By the way, what would you like to request for? She asked. Nothing comes to mind for now. I'll ask when I think of something, Gustav replied. With this, the tension in the atmosphere disappeared completely. Angie was still staring at Lim with a suspicious expression, while Lim was staring at Gustav with a contemplative expression. How are you so good? Lim finally decided to ask Gustav what was on her mind. It wasn't till around 10 in the night before everyone returned to their rooms. The evening had been very interesting, and Gustav played a few more games with the rest of the girls. He got to know them better through this. Angie kept dragging him from place to place, and he noticed that she wouldn't let him complete a conversation with Lim before interrupting. Nevertheless, he was able to figure out the background of the girls. Elle, who was the most mature girl in terms of thought and looks, was the daughter of a famous international movie director. Ariana, the playful one, was from a well-off family of martial artists. Lim, as mentioned earlier, was from a very prestigious family, and she happened to be the fiercest out of the three. Angie was the only one whose family background didn't really fit into this group, yet the four of them were best of friends. They never cared about family background. They always cared for and protected one another. Gustav now understood why Angie wasn't tainted like he was. He now understood why she was able to remain innocent and caring. It was all attributed to her group of friends who always watched her back. It would be impossible for anyone to bully her and go scot-free since she had friends that she could count on. He wondered if he would have also remained caring if he had friends that would stand up for him and have his back as they had hers. On one hand, he was a little conflicted, while on the other, he was glad that he became like this because he felt Angie was just too naive. There was no way such friends would be there to protect her every time. Gustav worried that if she remained this way and ended up getting broken by the world, she might end up being worse than he is right now. He felt Shed probably turned completely dark and heartless because anyone who was extremely good, nice, and caring had the potential to be extremely evil, vicious, and inhumane. Although it bothered him, Gustav felt this was unlikely to happen if Angie decided to live a casual life. Gustav decided not to sweat it and went to sleep after arriving in his room. The next morning, everyone had woken up at the appropriate time and done all their necessary morning routines. Today was the third day of the exchange event. The students were taken to Atrahia City High School again for the duel. When they arrived there, as expected, they were taken to the third training ground in the school. The training ground was like a stadium with spectator seats, and the battleground was in the middle. The difference between the training ground and a stadium was it was at least 7 times bigger. It was constructed this big so residual attacks from mixed bloods won't make contact with the audience by mistake. The students participating were called out to the battleground a few minutes after everyone arrived. The duel would be in teams. A team consisting of 7 students representing each school. There were some rectangular, glowing outlines on the battleground. The rectangular, glowing outlines on the battleground were spaced several hundred feet away from one another, and there were up to 6 of them. According to the rules, 2 schools would battle with their teams inside one of the rectangular outlines, each 7 students from a school against 7 others inside the rectangular outline. A person would be disqualified if they were thrown out of the rectangle. The students were laced in tight bodysuits of different colors. The 7 students of Echelon Academy were laced in red bodysuits, which depicted which team they belonged to. Every school participant had theirs. The principal started announcing the schools that would be going against one another. Every school would be dueling with another at the same time. That was the reason for having several rectangular rings. So every school would have their match at the same time. Atrahia City High School versus Cheryl High School. Both their participants should head to Ring C. Your duel will be taking place there, Principal Dirk announced. Black Rock Schools versus Rose High. Head for Ring D. Principal Dirk kept announcing. Echelon Academy versus Redemption High. Chapter 109. Echelon Academy versus Redemption High. Principal Dirk announced. All participants should please move to Ring A. When Principal Dirk mentioned Echelon Academy, the entire training ground became noisier. Everyone remembered the way Gustav dominated the exchange of knowledge yesterday, and hoped there wouldn't be someone who would dominate the dueling session like that. They weren't really bothered, since the exchange of knowledge was way different from using their bloodlines to exchange blows, and wasn't based on knowledge, instead was based on strength. However, they were still on the lookout for the way Echelon Academy was going to perform today. This was all due to Gustav placing a lot of value on Echelon's Academy's head due to yesterday's win. Ascension Academy versus Eagle Wings High. Participants should please move to Ring F, Principal Dirk announced once again. It took around 1 more minute before he finished announcing the rest of the schools and their opponents. At this moment, all the battle rings were filled by the participants. Ring A was at the southwest corner of the training ground. This was where Echelon Academy and Redemption High were facing off. The 7 participants stood opposite one another, red bodysuits on the left and yellow bodysuits on the right. Principal Dirk started announcing the rules, and according to them, injuries were allowed. Participants could be disqualified by being sent out of the ring or passing out from an injury. There were teachers in charge of healing severe injuries on standby. Also, if a teacher deemed an attack too powerful and felt it could cause irrevocable harm or instant death, they could step in to stop the attack from making contact with the participant. If they did that, the participant who the attack was meant for would be disqualified, but they would only step in if they were certain that the participant couldn't block or survive the attack. Of course, attacking a participant in a bid to kill or cause more injuries after the said participant had passed out would bring about disqualification. All participants had gotten to the Zulu rank, so no one could really predict how the duel would turn out, since no mixed blood was lower than that in rank. After announcing the rules completely, the principal left the moderation of the battle to the defense teachers in the school. The participants had taken a battle stance after using the battle formation they were trained with to position themselves properly for effective battling. Once the go-ahead was given for the battle to start, the participants dashed out with vigor towards their opponents. Bam! 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 Sounds of collisions rang out in the air as the participants clashed with one another. Different kinds of attacks were sent out, making the entire training ground chaotic. Cheers! 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 Dash, go Tom, defeat that urchin. Dash, Goddess Asiri. Dash. Yes, Urarika, give him the whip. The students in the spectators' seat cheered for their favorites as the battle commenced. On Echelon Academy's side, Captain Andrew was going against the captain of Redemption High. Both of them had B-grade bloodlines and were also skilled in using their abilities, so it was turning out to be a really fierce battle. The other Echelon Academy participants clashed with the participants of Redemption High. From the first exchange, the more powerful side was determined. Apart from the captain of Redemption High, the rest didn't hold a candle to Echelon Academy participants. They were gradually being pushed back as the battle progressed. The captains of both teams were going full ballistic against each other at the moment. Captain Andrew of Echelon Academy and Captain Romru of Redemption High. Andrew had his muscular arms covered in red scales and with 4 pointy claws. His legs from his kneecaps downwards also had the same scales and 4 pointy toes on each foot. His speed, along with his attacks that sliced through the air and created burning effects, were still dodged by the captain of the other team. Captain Romru had 2 black wings sprouting out of his back. The wings were black and surprisingly metallic. At the start of the battle, 2 long feather-like swords protruded out of his black wings, which he grabbed onto and pulled out. These black, feathered-like swords were about 4 feet in length each. He had been using them to fight against Andrew since the start of the battle. His flight speed was very fast, allowing him to dodge most of Andrew's attack. However, he also couldn't touch Andrew because the scales covering Andrew's legs also blessed him with good speed. Although Romer's speed wasn't as flexible as Andrew's due to Andrew having flight ability, he was still able to keep up pretty fine. They were both well skilled after all. Bam! 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 Both of them clashed repeatedly, causing sounds of metallic collision. Andrew leaped up and spun diagonally with his claws extending forward, towards Romerus' chest. Swee-yi! His sharp claws sliced and burned through the air crazily and fierce. Clang! 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 Romaru placed the feather-like swords in front of himself, blocking the multiple spinning swings in midair. Due to Andrew's claws slamming onto the feathered-like sword repeatedly, the stacked-up force caused Romaru to be catapulted backward by a few feet. A red glow spread from the point of contact to other parts of the feathered-like sword. The sword broke into two while Romaru was still being catapulted backward. "TCH, not again," he said internally as another two swords started protruding out of his wings behind. Andrew landed back on his feet after his initial attack and dashed forward at full speed. Swish! He arrived before the catapulting Romaru in an instant and swung his claws towards Romerus' chest. Romaru had to stop the process of creating another sword and quickly used his wings to cover himself. Slash! Slash! Clang! Clang! The wings perfectly shielded Romaru from the multiple slashes Andrew sent out, causing sparks to fly across the place. His wings became red hot, but in a few seconds they reverted to normal. Chapter 110. Andrew's claws had a certain kind of burning effect. Once his claws made contact with any hard surface, that hard surface was guaranteed to melt from the high temperature of his claws. Romerus' feathered swords had been destroyed repeatedly due to the high temperature that could easily burn through a metal plate, but the temperature wasn't high enough to burn through his wings. Seeing that his claws were not able to cut through the wings, Andrew slashed downwards towards his Romerus leg. Swish! Romaru reacted by flapping his wings and dashing upwards with speed, causing the claws to miss him. Andrew didn't wait for a second after noticing that his claws didn't connect. He leaped upwards immediately. Fwish! His body traveled across the air, crossing a height of more than 5 meters in a few seconds. As he was catching up with Romaru in midair, he slashed out again from underneath. At this time, Romaru had finished recreating the feathered swords and dragged them out of his wings to clash with Andrew. Blam! The sword and the claws clashed just as they crossed the 12 meters mark above the ground. Bam! Seeing that his attack was blocked, he kept slash out severally, but Romaru also returned the attacks by swinging at Andrew's claws repeatedly. Bam! Slash! Bam! Slash! Bam! Slash! Bam! Andrew was still able to slash out a few more times in midair before the law of gravity started pulling him downwards. As he descended, Romaru flapped his wings again and followed his descent while swinging out the feathered swords in his left hand. The sword headed for Andrew's neck with intense speed. It was only a few inches from making contact with his neck as they closed in on the ground. Andrew raised his right arm to block the sword and also threw out his left arm. Slash! Escara white chach. Romerus' sword cut 3 inches deep into Andrew's right arm, while Andrew's left hand cut 3 long slashes across Romerus' chest. Bang! They both landed on the ground with their bodies bleeding. Andrew landed on his back, while Romaru landed on his front. Both of them immediately jumped back up to their feet after landing in that manner and dashed towards each other again. It was as if they didn't feel any pain with the way they stood up and dashed towards each other again with their bodies bleeding profusely. Just when they were several inches away from making contact with each other again, a blue beam suddenly appeared from the right side. Bam! It slammed into Romerus' side, catapulting his entire body several hundred feet towards the side. His wings had blocked a part of the beam due to reflex action, but the remaining power was enough to still send him flying. He stabilized himself after flying towards the side for a few more seconds, while blood leaked out of his nose. He hovered above the ground while checking out the source of the attack. A blue cannon made of light was standing on the left side of the battle ring. The attack shot out earlier had come from his blind spot. He was focusing on his battle with Andrew, so he didn't notice it until it was too late. A long blue-haired beauty sat on the cannon which was currently pointing at him. "You didn't think I was the only powerful mixed blood here, did you?" Andrew said with a strong voice. "Even your impenetrable wings will not be able to stop her cannons from ripping you apart," Andrew said before dashing towards Ромару again. Ромару figured that one of his teammates had already been disqualified, which was the reason for his current predicament. Toy! Another beam shot out as he dashed forward also. Swish! He was able to easily dodge the beams now that he knew about them. Swish! Toy! Swish! Toy! He dodged the cannon several times as he flew across the air before arriving in front of Andrew. Another battle commenced, but Ромару was not able to fight effectively like before. He would have to dodge the deadly beams, which for some reason couldn't hurt Andrew even when it made contact with his body. This made Ромару go from attack to defense. Bang! 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 After trading blows repeatedly, one of Andrew's attacks finally connected with Ромаru's body, blowing him back, but before Ромару could stabilize himself, the blue beam slammed into him again while he was still in midair. Bang! He was once again catapulted towards the left while spitting out blood. His body was still spiraling in midair when he noticed a monstrous-looking green foot suddenly appear from his right side and kicked forward forcefully. The large foot slammed into his ribs with intensity. Splurt! He spat out a mouthful of blood as his rib cage collapsed with his body sent flying towards the right. Another one, Ромарus' eyes were currently spinning with his face showing an expression of pain, yet he was still able to analyze a bulky-looking beast with green skin standing on the side. "Another one of my teammates has lost?" Ромару said internally as he flapped his wings, causing his body to suddenly ascend with speed. Swish! Boom! A loud explosion rocked the air around him when he reached the height of 20 meters, and the strong blast it created sent him tumbling down. Bang! Even when his body slammed to the ground, he still didn't know what hit him. Ромару was also unaware that at this moment all his teammates had been kicked out of the ring, and he was the only one left. Right now it was 7 against 1. Ромару was only able to hold on for a few seconds more, before he was also sent crashing out of the ring with a battered body full of diverse injuries. All teammates of Redemption High have been evicted from the ring. Echelon Academy wins. A loud voice that announced the defeat of Redemption High and the win of Echelon Academy reverberated across the training ground. Cheers! 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 The students erupted in cheers. Echelon Academy was the first to defeat their opponents, but after a few minutes, other schools were also starting to finish up. Atrahia City High wins. Salvation Academy wins. As time passes, more and more announcements were heard. Black Rock School's wins. Gustav only clapped when the announcement for Black Rock School winning was made. When Echelon Academy's win was announced earlier, he didn't even react. From the spectator's seat on the east side, he stared at Black Rock participants coming out of the battle ring. "Good job, Angie," he muttered with a smile. Chapter 111. "Good job, Angie," he said with a slight smile. Angie happened to be one of the participants representing Black Rock Schools. Not only did she participate, she was also one of the participants that supported the most during this duel. Her speed outstripped that of every other participant, and her combat power was not lacking either. Although it still fell far short of Gustav's prowess, it was nothing to scoff at, especially in this battle where everyone was slower than she was. Gustav also noticed that her speed had increased since the last time they raced. She was able to use a new ability with her bloodline that was also related to speed. Gustav figured that it was similar to him using sprint, however there was a difference. Angie's speed was multiplied by 4 times when she making use of this ability, and although she couldn't maintain it for long before running out of energy, being able to use it for 10 seconds was more than enough to cause havoc on the battleground because it was more than 2 times of Gustav's speed when he activated Sprint. Angie used her speed to take out 2 participants from the opposing side. She was seen as the most valued player since the rest of her teammates were able to focus on the strongest participant due to her help. This led to their win since the battle power of the strongest participant on the opposing side was more powerful than their strongest participant. The first round came to an end and the schools that won were announced. Echelon Academy, Atrahea City High School, Salvation Academy, Black Rock Schools, Brer Bullet High, and Reflection Academy. Now that the other schools had been disqualified, the next round was only going to involve the participants from these 6 schools. The principal of Atrahea City High had announced the commencement of the second round after all the participants who lost earlier left the training ground. Echelon Academy versus Briar Bullet High. Participants should move to Ring A. Atrahea City High versus Salvation Academy. Participants should move to Ring C, Reflection Academy versus Black Rock Schools. Participants should move to Ring E. Principal Dirk announced in successions and left the rest to the referees. The participants were back inside the ring, facing different opponents this time. In the second round, another rule was implemented. Every school now had 3 substitution slots, which they could use in exchanging a player. So even if a participant was disqualified, it was possible to send in another participant from the same school to fill in the slot. This could only be done 3 times, and every school had the opportunity to do it. So unless a school defeated another school very quickly to the point where no substitutes were able to be called on, they would still have to battle at least 10 participants from that school to win. After a brief moment of speaking, the go-ahead was given for the second round to begin. The participants lunged towards one another again with battle intent. Bang, 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 bang. Chaotic sounds collision rang out again as they clashed with one another. The students and the spectators were cheering for their favorites, once again, while watching the duel with a tense look. Gustav, which school do you think has the highest chance of winning? A mature feminine voice questioned from Gustav's left side. Gustav turned to the side to stare at her for a few seconds with a look of contemplation before turning back to stare at the battle rings. The other 2 females on Gustav's right also had expressions that shown they were also interested in listening to Gustav's reply. Among all the schools, Echelon Academy and Atrahea City High School have the highest combat power. Also, their battle formation and the way they battle with such teamwork is better than the rest of the teams, so I can say with almost 100% certainty that the final round will be between both teams, Gustav explained with a solemn look. The girls who were sitting beside him were Elle, Ariana, and Lim. Elle was seated on his left side, while Lim and Ariana were seated on his right. Does that mean our Black Rock school doesn't stand a chance of winning? Elle asked with a look of dissatisfaction. Gustav stared at the battlefield again with a contemplative look before replying, I don't think so. At most your school will take 3rd place. Gustav had studied the initial battle of all the schools, so he could tell that Black Rock School's participants were lacking in prowess compared to the rest of the schools that also won. The only reason why he felt Black Rock might have a chance to get to the final round was because of Angie. Having Angie on their team was a huge plus for them. Even if by any chance she happened to not be powerful enough to defeat the opponent placed before her, she still had enough speed to disrupt the flow of attack on the battlefield and cause distractions. These feats were enough to score victories for Black Rock schools if they could manage the way she was used properly on the battlefield. The only issue was that tactic couldn't work forever. As they kept using it, other participants would analyze and find a way to counter it unless they were idiots. Just as Gustav was analyzing this, it was already happening on the battlefield. Angie just happened to receive a hit from one of their opponents and ended up almost being sent out of the ring. Although she wasn't using her highest speed when the attack hit, the speed she was using was still higher than that of everyone's, so she shouldn't have been hit. The reason for this was they were starting to predict her movement patterns after she managed to successfully land hits on two of their teammates and sent them out of the ring. Another thing Gustav had noticed was Angie was not decisive enough when she wanted to hit an opponent. When it came to hitting people, she would hesitate, which usually affected her movement for a moment. You're tuning in to the Thunder Spear YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.